Gillis Elragan had once stood at the summit of the continent's martial world, a 10-star warrior whose name alone stirred fear and reverence. When the divine dragon descended and plunged the lands into chaos, it was Gillis who answered. Their clash shattered mountains and split the skies. At the end of that cataclysmic battle, the dragon's immense body crashed to the earth. Silence followed. The war that had defined an era was finally over. Amid the ruins, Gillis approached the object of legend, a radiant golden fruit said to grant immortality and open the path to the absolute peak of martial arts, a height no human had ever truly reached. He did not hesitate. The moment he swallowed it, golden light erupted from his back like the rising sun. Power surged through his meridians, burned through his blood, and etched itself into bone and marrow. Years passed, then decades. Though the legends had promised eternity, time still claimed its toll. His hair whitened. His once unbreakable body grew frail. Now he lay upon his final bed. Family gathered close. His son stood nearest, eyes red with grief. Gillis looked at him calmly. "Do not make such a face," he murmured. He had lived fully bathed in glory, battle, and honor. Few could ask for more. Yet as death crept closer, a quiet regret surfaced. If only there had been more time. If only he could have taken one final step toward the true summit. His vision dimmed. Then he opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar. Confused, he tried to move, only to see a tiny hand lift into view. Small, soft, helpless. He was in an infant's body. For a fleeting moment, even a former 10-star master felt shaken. He had sensed nothing. No transition, no technique, no force. It had simply happened. He forced himself to think. Someone must have done this. Then realization struck. The golden fruit. It had never promised endless life in the same flesh. It had offered rebirth. A faint, unsettling smile tugged at his infant lips. A second life meant boundless time. This time he would not fall short of the summit. But confusion returned as he took in his surroundings. Cradles, rows upon rows of them. Dozens of infants lay nearby. Had he been reborn once more into the Elragan lineage? The door creaked open before he could reflect further. Several maids entered, carrying trays filled with feeding bottles and glass containers of a dark, ominous liquid. One maid lifted a goblin infant without care and forced the fluid down its throat. Gillis watched, stunned. The child's body glowed briefly, then burst apart. Blood splattered across the floor. The maid merely clicked her tongue. That concentration should be safe once diluted. Then her gaze shifted to him. Before he could react, she picked him up and pressed the bottle to his lips. The scent alone told him everything. Ancient dragon blood. His thoughts trembled. Why would they feed such a thing to infants? His instincts screamed to resist, but his newborn body betrayed him. Despite struggling, he swallowed a small amount. Around him, other babies cried and thrashed, spitting out the liquid in agony. Then clarity struck him. If he could fully refine this power, he could surpass even his former self. He stopped resisting. Instead, he drank, calmly, deliberately. He guided the violent energy inward, drawing in every trace of its terrifying essence. The maid stared at him in disbelief, but said nothing. A survivor was a success. When the bottle emptied, she set him back in his cradle. From nearby cribs, faint golden glows flickered. Others had endured. Overwhelmed by the torrent of power reshaping his fragile body, his consciousness finally slipped into sleep. 7 years passed. The child once known as Gillis now bore the name Zeke Elragan. In a training courtyard, he balanced effortlessly on one hand. A massive stone rested across his raised feet as he performed push-ups without the slightest tremor. With a sharp exhale, he kicked upward. The rock launched into the air. Zeke twisted, landed lightly, and let the stone crash behind him with a thunderous impact. A small smile formed. This body was extraordinary, refined by ancient dragon blood. Within all living beings lay a fragment of primordial source energy. The blood he and the other infants had consumed contained a sliver of that origin. Those who survived developed physiques far beyond ordinary humans. But Zeke was not merely one of the survivors. In his previous life, he had absorbed the true source of a divine dragon. This time, he had accepted every drop of ancient blood without rejection. The transformation exceeded even his expectations. And yet, he frowned. Despite his monstrous foundation, he remained only a 1-star warrior. That fact unsettled him. At this age in his former life, he would have already stood at 4 stars. Something was holding him back. In this world, a star was not a symbol. It was a compression of one's true source power to its ultimate limit. Cultivators imagine their bodies as vast inner universes. Within that cosmos, a star would be born, suspended in the void of their core. Each additional star demanded exponentially greater refinement. The process grew harsher, the risk steeper, but the reward was absolute strength. More stars meant greater dominion over power. In his previous life as Gillis Elragan, Zeke had achieved what no one else in recorded history ever had: 10 stars, a realm thought unreachable. a solitary peak. And yet now, despite possessing a body forged by dragon blood and terrifying physical potential, he remained trapped at a single star. Zeke's brow furrowed. 7 years had passed since his rebirth as the illegitimate son of the Eldragon family head. His mother had died when he was still an infant. His father, the patriarch himself, had never once visited. Zeke found that fact more absurd than painful. After a millennium, he had returned to the very same Eldragon bloodline, but the world he'd awakened to was harsher than the one he remembered. Strength ruled everything. The powerful consumed the weak without hesitation. The clearest proof of that brutality was the dragon's trial. Only infants who survived that ritual were acknowledged and groomed as true Eldragon warriors. Zeke had survived, yet he had not been chosen. Instead of being raised within the main estate, he had been sent to a remote countryside residence, cared for only by a handful of maids, no instructors, no guidance, no acknowledgement. 7 years of isolation. Finally, he asked directly whether he had failed the dragon's trial, and thus been denied formal training. The maid assigned to him answered without emotion. If he required anything for his daily needs, he only had to speak. That was not what he meant. He told her he could manage his own necessities. What he needed was combat instruction. He asked about the other children of the main branch. The response did not change. When he pressed further, her expression remained perfectly still. At last, she clarified her orders extended only to attending his personal comforts. Zeke studied her carefully. She carried the presence of a 3-star warrior. For foundational training, that would have been more than sufficient. Yet she refused. Exhaling quietly, Zeke turned away and announced that he would be heading into the forest. 7 years with nothing but minimal conversation. It was suffocating. Still, none of the maids attempted to stop him. Within the forest, Zeke chewed bitter, toxic herbs as if they were ordinary leaves. The taste was repulsive, but poison tempered the body. He welcomed the refinement. As he walked, he felt it. Movement beneath the soil. Roots stirred unnaturally, brushing at his ankles as though aware of him. His eyes narrowed. "Must you keep following?" he muttered under his breath. Silence answered him. He sighed. "If you have something to say, step out instead of hiding." No one emerged. The deeper he ventured, the more unfamiliar the environment became. A dark, lingering mist coiled between the trees, something that had not existed 1,000 years ago. From a thicket ahead, an anger boar burst forth. Its eyes were bloodshot, foam dripping from its mouth as it charged. Zeke shifted aside with minimal movement. The beast thundered past where he had stood. Energy gathered into his fist. He struck once, precise, controlled, into the creature's abdomen. The boar collapsed instantly. Zeke blinked, then allowed himself a faint smile. That had barely been a proper blow. Even at 1-star, his foundation made the power overwhelming. He lifted the carcass onto his shoulder with ease. The quality of a star, he reflected, mattered far more than the quantity. Still, he was weary of solitude. Perhaps it was time to leave this place altogether, unseen behind a nearby tree. A man watched in stunned silence. The boy had not even formed a 2nd star, yet he had killed an anger boar with a single casual strike, without formal training. Worse, he had sensed the watcher's presence earlier. The man's gaze sharpened. Zeke's mother was long dead. His father showed no interest. There was no record of education or private tutoring. And yet, as an illegitimate child of the family head, Zeke was not permitted freedom. Surveillance had been constant. A slow smile crept across the observer's face. Even if he bore the patriarch's blood, the situation was becoming intriguing. When Zeke returned to the estate, he immediately sensed unfamiliar presences within. Several figures stood inside the residence. Each radiated disciplined strength and unmistakable authority. Curious but cautious, Zeke approached quietly and listened from beyond the doorway. Their aura was not hostile, but it carried weight. He pushed the door open without hesitation. "State your purpose." The men turned as one. They wore formal attire adorned with the Eldragon crest. Stepping forward in unison, they bowed slightly. "We have come to escort young Master Zeke for an examination." Zeke's eyes narrowed. An examination? Before he could protest further, they motioned for him to follow. And so, without further explanation, they escorted him toward the main Eldragon estate. For the first time since his rebirth, Zeke stepped beyond the quiet estate that had confined him for 7 years. Dressed in a formal academy uniform, he was escorted into an enormous compound bustling with children bearing the Eldragon name. Only then did he learn where he had been brought. The Dragon's Nest Academy, an institution founded and governed by the clan itself. Every child of Eldragon blood was required to enroll upon turning 7. Today was the entrance examination. The problem was obvious. Zeke had received no lessons, no combat instruction, no academic preparation, nothing. Refusal, however, did not exist as an option. The examination was tradition, absolute and unquestioned. As he passed through the towering gates, irritation stirred within him. Around him, children laughed and chattered with bright anticipation. Zeke walked alone, stone, lowering his gaze as a dull pressure built behind his eyes. A cautious voice interrupted his thoughts. A boy with vivid blue hair approached, studying him with concern. He mentioned that Zeke looked pale, as though something was wrong. Zeke turned, his expression cool. "What do you want?" The boy flinched but did not retreat. He introduced himself as Langus, explaining that he had only spoken because Zeke seemed troubled. Zeke paused. There was a timidity about the boy, but no malice. His aura was faint yet steady, unpolished though not weak. Zeke exhaled quietly. "My apology. I'm unfamiliar with this." He introduced himself in return and admitted he did not know what the examination involved. "Do you?" Langus blinked in surprise. The entrance exam rarely changed. Everyone knew its structure. "You truly don't know?" he asked. Zeke confirmed it without embarrassment. Langus sighed, preparing to explain. But laughter echoed sharply down the corridor. A group of boys approached, their expressions openly mocking. One pointed at Langus and called him the stray from Old Scale Village. At their head stood Rhett, another youth from the same village. Rhett sneered, asking why someone like Langus would even bother showing up instead of returning home where he belonged. Langus answered evenly that he had come to take the examination. That calm response only fueled Rhett's contempt. He declared Langus worthless, insisting someone like him could never enter the academy. His laughter turned cruel as he brought up Langus's father, a man branded a mock dragon. Zeke observed quietly. Langus's fists tightened at his sides. Anger flickered beneath his composed exterior. Within the Eldragon clan, rank dictated worth. At the summit were the Elder Dragons. Beneath them stood adult dragons, captains, and elite fighters. Then came the young dragons, followed by lesser dragons. And at the very bottom, the mock dragons. Those who failed the Academy's entrance exam or could not graduate were cast aside, labeled false, stripped of status. Yet Langus did not crumble under the insult. There was resolve in him, an unshaken belief that even those scorned as mock dragons could still possess genuine strength. Zeke stepped forward. "How can you be certain of his failure?" he asked calmly, before the examination has even begun. Rhett stiffened, startled by the interruption. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And why are you interfering?" "I have no quarrel with you," Zeke replied evenly. "I'm only curious why you believe he cannot succeed." Rhett scoffed. "People like Langus," he insisted, "were born to fail." Zeke's eyes sharpened. "He's stronger than you," he said plainly. "Stronger than any of you?" Rhett's face flushed red. He accused Zeke of insulting them outright, and tension crackled in the air. But before fists could fly, an examiner arrived. "Line up." The command cut through the corridor. The entrance examination was beginning. All candidates were to register and receive their numbered tags. Rhett shot Zeke a venomous glare before turning away. Zeke muttered under his breath that there was no need for such anger. Youth these days were overly volatile. From beside him, Langus gave him a look. "We're the same age," he pointed out. "Anyone would get angry if you told them they were weaker." Zeke did not argue. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "If attendance is mandatory, why did they claim he shouldn't even attempt it?" Langus hesitated, realizing once again how little Zeke knew. Students, he explained quietly, were permitted to withdraw before the examination if they believed they lacked the ability to pass. Many did so to avoid humiliation, or worse. That surprised Zeke more than the mockery had. Langus looked uncertain before offering a suggestion. "If you're unprepared, it might be better to withdraw. You could avoid getting hurt." Zeke stared ahead at the registration line forming inside the academy gates. Withdraw? The notion did not sit well with him at all. Zeke only smiled. "Someone with my potential doesn't withdraw," he said with quiet certainty. Before Langus could argue, Zeke caught him by the sleeve and pulled him toward the examination grounds. Inside the courtyard, an examiner stood before a massive stone monolith and called the candidates to attention. The rules were announced in a clear, steady voice. The task sounded simple. Each participant had to leave even the slightest mark upon the regeneration stone positioned at the center of the arena. They were allowed to use only the weapons provided by the examiner, though striking with bare hands was permitted as well. Every candidate would be granted 3 attempts. Zeke listened without much expression. On the surface, it did not seem particularly difficult. Langus, however, had gone pale. While whispers of anxiety spread through the gathered children, Zeke merely wondered why such a test inspired this level of fear. These were descendants of dragons, children who had survived the ritual of drinking dragon blood as infants. Compared to that, this trial seemed almost trivial. The first candidate stepped forward. He roared and swung his sword with everything he had. A metallic crash split the courtyard. The blade shattered on impact. The force rebounded instantly, sending the boy flying backward. He hit the ground screaming. Both arms twisted unnaturally. The stone remained flawless. The examiner calmly asked if he wished to attempt again, but the boy was already unconscious. He was carried away moments later. Zeke glanced sideways at Langus, noticing the tension in his expression. "It's a regeneration stone," Langus explained quietly. It restores minor damage immediately, and reflects brute force at 100-fold strength. That earned Zeke's attention. Langis continued, saying the key was not raw power but perfect control over one's ether source. Without precise internal circulation, physical strength meant nothing. Zeke surveyed the crowd. A few participants carried themselves with enough confidence and aura to succeed. Rhett and his companions were among them. Still, the screams continued. One after another, candidates failed. Broken bones and tears became a common sight across the courtyard. Then the examiner called, "Candidate number 315. Zeke stepped forward. Langus grabbed his arm in alarm, urging him to reconsider. But Zeke gently removed his hand. "I'll be fine," he said, and walked on. As he approached the stone, a subtle yet immense pressure radiated from him. Even the examiner's eyes sharpened. When asked to choose a weapon, Zeke shook his head. "My fists are enough." Laughter rippled through the students. Some openly mocked him. Others shook their heads, certain his arms would be crushed like the first candidates. Langus felt dread coil in his stomach. He was already blaming himself for not stopping Zeke. With the examiner's signal, the attempt began. Zeke stepped close to the stone and studied it carefully. Its surface was unlike any mineral he recognized. Dense, ancient, forged by time beyond measure. The realization reminded him how vast and unfamiliar this world still was. But now was not the moment for curiosity. He drew upon his ether. Golden light gathered around his hands. A radiant yellow aura flared to life, swirling tightly around his frame as he assumed the stance of his Dragon Slayer form. Then he struck. His fist collided with the stone in a single decisive motion. The explosion that followed shook the entire courtyard. The upper half of the regeneration stone burst apart, fragments scattering outward as a violent shockwave tore through the grounds. Dust and debris filled the air, forcing students to shield their faces. When the haze finally settled, silence reigned. Zeke stood where he had struck. Blood trailed down his arm. His uniform was ripped at the shoulder. He exhaled slowly. There was no triumph in his eyes, only dissatisfaction. His control had faltered. The excess force had cost him precision. Around him, the students stared in stunned disbelief. Rhett's face twisted with fury. His earlier arrogance completely shattered. Langus stood motionless, mouth slightly open, unable to process what he had witnessed. Even the examiner appeared shaken. Such destruction should have required the power of someone ranked 4-star or higher. And yet, it had been accomplished by a 7-year-old child, one who was not even recognized as legitimate within the clan. The examiner's gaze lingered on Zeke longer than necessary. He had recognized the technique. Zeke stepped closer, unconcerned. "Have I passed?" After a brief pause, the examiner gave a slow nod. From his sleeve, he produced a small glass vial filled with luminous green liquid and handed it over. When Zeke asked what it was, a junior examiner nearby frowned at his tone and sharply gestured for him to move aside, clearly treating it as nothing more than a standard reward. Zeke returned to Langus. "That was incredible," Langus said immediately, still half in shock. Zeke lifted the vial. "What is this?" "A grade 1 healing potion," Langus explained. "It's common for successful candidates." Zeke studied the liquid carefully. It didn't appear toxic, but something about it felt refined. Elixirs came to mind. True elixirs were legendary substances, distilled from rare herbs found in hidden realms and the cores of divine or phantom beasts. Authentic ones could instantly mend wounds and restore ether reserves, though crafting them bordered on impossible. After a brief hesitation, Zeke uncorked the vial and drank it. Warmth surged through his body. The tear in his shoulder sealed. The bleeding from his arm stopped at once. Even the lingering ache vanished as if it had never existed. Zeke's eyes widened slightly. This was no crude mixture. It was genuine craftsmanship. Langus admitted he didn't know much about elixirs, only that the Elragan clan's medicinal creations far surpassed anything available beyond their territory. To Langus it was normal. To Zeke it was astonishing. Yet as he assessed his condition, he noticed something missing. His ether reserves had not increased. The potion restored flesh, not internal energy. He glanced at the empty vial again. So this was the height of human refinement, perfected over centuries, and still incomplete. Langus praised him again, calling his performance unbelievable. Zeke merely shrugged. "I intend to become the strongest." This was expected. Soon after, Rhett and his companions took their turns. Each managed to leave a mark and passed without incident. Zeke had anticipated no less. Then the examiner called, "Candidate number 414. Langus stiffened. He stepped forward, movements rigid, and approached the regeneration stone. Zeke immediately sensed the boy's spiraling nerves and gestured calmly for him to steady his breathing. Langus glanced back, clearly overwhelmed by the standard Zeke had just set. Taking a sword from the examiner, he positioned himself before the stone. Zeke watched intently, trying to discern his approach. Langus inhaled deeply and struck. The blade barely grazed the surface. The stone remained unchanged. The rebound force shoved him backward, nearly knocking him off his feet. "You have 2 attempts remaining," the examiner reminded him. Langus clenched his jaw and tried again, focusing harder, pouring in more effort. Nothing. The stone showed no reaction. Frustration bled into panic. Doubt clouded his vision. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes. Rhett and his group burst into laughter, mocking him loudly. They repeated the insult, half-dragon, declaring he would never belong. One attempt left, the examiner announced. Langus's hands trembled. Fear strangled his focus. At that moment, Zeke stepped forward. His presence cut cleanly through Langus's spiraling thoughts. "Stop using the sword," Zeke said firmly. "Repeating the same mistake won't change the outcome." The bullies laughed again, pointing out that Langus had trained exclusively with a blade. Ignoring them, Zeke turned to the examiner. "Is switching weapons permitted?" "It is," the examiner replied without hesitation. Zeke met Langus's eyes. "Stand properly, breathe." Langus swallowed and nodded. For a fleeting moment he thought of his father, a man denied entry into this academy, branded a failure, ridiculed as a mock dragon. Despite that humiliation, his father had never abandoned pride or perseverance. Langus tightened his grip. He would not let that sacrifice mean nothing. Though unfamiliar with it, he selected a spear. He decided on the simplest motion possible, a direct thrust. If he failed, so be it. But surrender was not an option. As he gripped the shaft, he felt something shift. His ether flowed differently, more smoothly than it ever had with a sword. He stepped forward and thrust. The spear struck. A shockwave rippled outward. Rhett's group began laughing prematurely. Then they heard it, a sharp cracking sound. A visible fracture spread across the surface of the regeneration stone. Silence fell. Langus had succeeded. The examiner stared at the crack in disbelief. Zeke reacted first, clapping once with unmistakable approval. Langus stood frozen, unable to process what he had done. The examiner recorded the result. Langus turned to Zeke for confirmation and was immediately pulled into a firm embrace. Tears streamed freely down his face as years of doubt and humiliation collapsed all at once. Rhett and his companions protested loudly, calling it luck, but their voices were cut short when the examiner declared the examination concluded. "The next stage will be the entrance ceremony." Zeke blinked. He had expected something far more elaborate than a single requirement. Langus quietly warned him that further evaluations might still await them inside the academy. Before they could discuss it further, several figures approached the courtyard. Their auras were immense. Zeke's attention sharpened immediately, drawn to one stern-faced individual among them. Without restraint, Zeke's expression hardened at the sight. Langus reacted instantly, whispering urgently for him to control himself. He subtly tugged at Zeke's sleeve, urging caution. Zeke said nothing, but he complied, observing in silence. Among the arrivals were multiple six-star warriors, imposing figures by any standard. Yet one presence eclipsed them all, Bala El Ragan, an 8-star powerhouse, his mere aura pressed down on the courtyard, commanding absolute authority without a single word spoken. Zeke observed Bala Elagon in silence. In his previous era, 8-star warriors had been exceedingly rare. Only a handful had existed across the entire continent. He found himself wondering how many still remained in this age. Bala stepped forward, his presence alone compressing the air. His voice carried effortlessly across the courtyard as he spoke of honor, legacy, and the pride of Elgin blood. Under the weight of his aura, many of the students trembled instinctively. Zeke did not. Instead of fear, something darker stirred within him, an irrational, unexplainable hostility toward Bala Elgin. The emotion surfaced without warning, deep and sharp, though he could not yet trace its origin. When Bala finally departed, another elder assumed control, his tone calmer, easing the suffocating pressure as he outlined the academy's standards and expectations. Though the intensity diminished, most students still struggled to steady themselves. Then came the next announcement: dormitory assignments. Zeke had assumed all students would share common quarters. Langus quickly clarified that the academy was divided into 4 residential halls, east, west, north, and south, each separated by internal ranking and arrangement. Moments later, Zeke's name was called. He exchanged a glance with Langus before following the indicated path. East dormitory. As he navigated the vast corridors, he reflected on how dramatically the academy had transformed over the past 1,000 years. The scale alone was far beyond what he remembered. Worried he might already be late, he pushed open the door to his assigned room and stopped. Langy stood inside. For a brief second, both boys stared at each other in disbelief. The coincidence dissolved the lingering tension from the day. Langus visibly relaxed, while Zeke felt an unexpected sense of ease at the familiar presence. Training would begin at dawn. Rest was mandatory. As they settled in, Zeke admitted he had missed much of the earlier orientation. Langus waved it off. Alone with his thoughts, Zeke reconsidered his initial intention to abandon the academy entirely and roam freely. Yet this unfamiliar era, with its powerful figures, refined techniques, and unanswered questions, had begun to intrigue him. After a millennium, curiosity won. For now, he would stay. A month passed. Training proved relentless. Under constant supervision, the students were drilled in mastering Dragon's Breath, a foundational combat art created by the 15th head of the Elragon clan. The tutor monitored them closely, correcting posture, breath control, and ether circulation with unwavering precision. Several students progressed rapidly. Among them was Laika, the family head's daughter. Even at her age, she was already recognized as nearing second star status, an extraordinary talent. Yet the tutor's gaze returned again and again to Zeke. Despite having received no prior instruction, Zeke absorbed the technique with unnatural efficiency. The tutor privately wondered whether some dormant lineage ability had awakened within him. Meanwhile, Zeke analyzed the technique with a far more critical eye. The modern dragon's breath differed significantly from the Dragon King's breath he once wielded. This version drew ether from the surrounding environment, cycling it internally to enhance physical output. Its strength depended heavily on control and mental visualization. Each noble branch preserved slight variations of its own. Zeke found the current form stable, but restrictive. It was safe, it was teachable, and it was limited. When stationary, it functioned well enough, but its adaptability during fluid combat was lacking. His original form had allowed seamless movement while channeling power, though its complexity had made it nearly impossible to pass down through generations. He understood the decision. To strengthen the clan as a whole, the 15th head had simplified the art. Zeke felt a faint measure of respect, for the technique to survive 1,000 years was no small feat. He found himself wondering how many other martial arts had evolved in his absence. When training concluded each day, the students shuffled toward the dining hall in exhaustion. Many could barely lift their utensils. Zeke ate steadily, unaffected. Noticing Langus struggling to finish even half his portion, Zeke nudged him. Eat properly. You'll need the energy. Langus looked baffled. How are you not tired? Zeke smirked lightly. You're simply weak. Work harder. As he spoke, he noticed a group of disciplined students eating in composed silence. Then someone approached their table. Zeke glanced up. Who are you? Langus nearly choked. That's Laika, he whispered urgently. The family head's daughter. Zeke blinked. I wasn't aware. Langus panicked at his tone, reminding him that they lacked the standing to address her so casually. Zeke dismissed the concern. I'm also the family head's child, legitimate or not. The statement stunned both Langus and Laika. Laika studied him carefully. You're claiming to be my father's son? Yes. Zeke answered without hesitation. Her skepticism lingered only briefly before curiosity overtook it. How did you destroy the regeneration stone with your bare hands? It wasn't particularly difficult, he replied evenly. Laika stepped closer, confidence radiating from her posture. I'll make you an offer, she said. Zeke raised an eyebrow. Become my subordinate. She explained her reasoning with calm calculation. As an illegitimate son, his position was precarious. Under her protection, he could avoid trouble. In exchange, she would use his strength to reinforce her candidacy as the next family head. Rewards would follow. Zeke regarded her in silence. He declined. Laika frowned, misinterpreting his refusal. You're aiming for the position yourself? He did not answer directly. Instead, he observed her ether flow, rapid, controlled, steadily approaching the second star threshold. She was talented. That much was undeniable. I have no interest in family politics, he said at last. The response visibly unsettled her. If not that, she pressed, then what do you want? Zeke's gaze cooled. Without warning, he drove his knife into the dining table. The blade embedded deeply into the wood. A suffocating surge of aura burst outward, crushing the air around them. Nearby students stiffened under the pressure, conversation dying instantly. The message required no elaboration. He would serve no one. He sought neither status nor protection. In his mind, he had already stepped beyond them all. Laika faltered beneath the crushing surge of Zeke's aura. For a fleeting moment, the confidence she carried so proudly splintered. Meanwhile, Zeke withdrew his presence as if nothing had occurred and resumed eating, indifferent to the tension he had just created. Langus hurried to smooth things over, whispering urgently in an attempt to calm both sides. But humiliation burned hotter than reason. Laika's composure shattered completely. In front of the entire hall, she issued a formal duel challenge, binding and public. Zeke blinked once, mildly surprised. Then he accepted. The news spread quickly. By the time they reached the training grounds, a crowd had already gathered. Students formed a wide circle, murmuring with anticipation. Lanji tugged at Zeke's sleeve, anxiety clear in his voice. He warned him that this was not a simple sparring match. Zeke waved off the concern. Truthfully, he knew almost nothing about Laika. Noticing Langus's unusually respectful tone when speaking of her, Zeke questioned him. Langus explained in a hushed voice. Laika carried the bloodline of House Typhona, one of the 4 great families allied to the Eldragon clan. She had mastered every foundational sword technique passed down through Typhona's lineage. Zeke listened, faint interest flickering in his eyes. The less I know, he said lightly, the more interesting this becomes. Langus stared at him in disbelief, demanding to know why he had agreed to something so reckless. Refusing was never an option. Zeke replied simply. Leica stepped into the center of the arena. She drove her sword point first into the earth, determination radiating from her stance. Langus retreated to the edge of the field, casting Zeke one last worried glance. Now alone before her opponent, Leica spoke plainly. She intended to become the next head of the Elragan family. Defeating Zeke, an illegitimate son with unusual talent, would strengthen her claim and force him into her service. Zeke listened, puzzled. And why, he asked honestly, should that concern me? Her disbelief was immediate. She explained the truth of their situation. 5 heirs vied for succession. Zeke was the only one without backing from any of the 4 great houses. Within the academy, alliances were everything. Power without support was fragile. Zeke understood her logic. He simply did not care. Without further warning, Leica attacked. Her sword cleaved downward with sharp precision. Zeke shifted aside effortlessly. The blade struck the ground instead, cracking stone on impact. She pressed forward relentlessly. Each swing carried greater speed and force than the last. Though wielding a training weapon, her technique was refined. Clean footwork, disciplined breath, flawless transitions between forms. The crowd erupted in cheers. But no matter how she accelerated, Zeke moved like drifting smoke. He stepped through openings before they fully formed, weaving around her strikes with minimal motion. Frustration tightened her expression. "Stop dodging and fight," she demanded. Zeke obliged. He slipped past her next slash and countered in the same breath. His fist drove into her chest. The impact thundered across the arena. A violent shockwave rippled outward as Leica staggered, blood spilling from her lips. She dropped to one knee. Silence swallowed the field. She lifted her head slowly. Confusion etched into her face. Her technique was superior, her speed unmatched among her peers. Yet she had failed to land even a single decisive strike. Zeke regarded her calmly. "You're fast," he admitted. "Faster than most one-star warriors," she bristled. "You're one-star too." "That's irrelevant." He had read her from the start, her breathing cadence, the tightening of her shoulders before each strike, the subtle flicker in her gaze that betrayed her chosen angle. Combined with centuries of combat experience, her movements were transparent. His calm assessment only deepened her fury. With a sharp breath, Leica forced herself upright and lunged again, sword raised with lethal intent. Zeke flipped backward, narrowly evading the descending arc. Her forward momentum overextended her balance. He struck again. The blow sent her hurtling across the arena. She crashed into the far wall, stone fracturing on impact as dust erupted around her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Langus rushed forward instinctively, shouting Zeke's name in alarm. But Zeke raised a hand, stopping him. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Despite his advantage, Zeke felt a spark of genuine respect for her endurance. The dust slowly cleared. Leica pushed herself upright, bruised, bleeding, unbowed. Langus called out, urging her to stop before permanent damage was done. Zeke's gaze sharpened. "If she continues," he said evenly, "the consequences won't be avoidable." Then he felt it. The shift. A fierce aura ignited around Leica, spiraling outward in blazing waves. The air thickened as her presence expanded beyond the limits of her body. She had broken through. 2-star. True source power now manifested externally, pressing against everything nearby. The spectators instinctively stepped back. Leica steadied herself, acknowledging through clenched teeth that Zeke's pressure had forced her evolution. Fueled by anger and exhilaration, she surged forward once more. Golden lightning trailed along her blade as she swung. Zeke's grin widened. Her speed had increased. Her strength had multiplied. Interesting. He continued to evade, not out of necessity, but to measure the full extent of her newfound power. In the midst of her relentless assault, Leica finally broke through his defense. Her blade skimmed across Zeke's cheek, leaving a thin line of red. It was minor, but it was contact. A spark of triumph flashed in her eyes. She seized the opening, resolve hardening as she prepared to unveil the inheritance of House Typhona, the Thunder Spirit Greatsword Arts. Zeke felt no fear, only anticipation. A technique unfamiliar to him was far more valuable than victory. Without warning, Leica moved. Thunderflash. Lightning detonated across the arena. The strike reached him before his body could fully respond. Electricity tore through him, seizing muscle and nerve alike. Pain exploded across his senses, yet he was smiling. Infuriated by that expression, Leica followed with another lightning-laced slash. This time the force drove him backward, the current raking through his frame. Zeke acknowledged it silently. At this level, her power was overwhelming. The spectators watched in stunned silence. No one had imagined a one-star warrior could withstand such ferocity. Even as his body trembled under the assault, Zeke observed. Her movements, though faster and more violent than before, still followed readable patterns. Her ascension to 2-star had granted explosive output far beyond warriors of his own era. Her control over lightning was refined, efficient, focused, devastating. He could end it, but curiosity held him in place. He wanted to see how far her strength extended. Leica, enraged by his unbroken grin, pressed forward with killing intent. A thunderous strike hurled him into the far wall. Stone shattered on impact as dust swallowed his silhouette. When the haze thinned, he was still standing. Something inside her cracked. She attacked again, a bolt slamming him down to one knee. Langus rushed forward in panic, but Leica refused to halt. To stop while he remained conscious would demean them both. "Yield," she demanded one final time. Zeke said nothing. The pride of an Eldragon burned quietly within him. His silence was answer enough. Fury consumed her restraint. She drew upon everything she had and invoked her ultimate technique, Heavenly Thunder. Energy gathered in blinding concentration. The sky itself seemed to answer her call as lightning engulfed Zeke entirely. His scream rang out as the ground beneath him fractured and collapsed. When the storm faded, his body lay motionless amid broken stone. Breathing heavily, Leica drove her sword into the earth, believing it finished. Then she sensed it. She turned. Zeke was standing. Electricity crawled across his skin in flickering arcs. Lightning danced along his arms and shoulders like living veins of light. Even he looked momentarily startled. As her relentless strikes had battered him, something unexpected had occurred. His Dragon King's breath had not resisted the lightning. It had absorbed it. Instead of rejecting the foreign energy, it merged with it. The current now flowed through him, amplifying him. The impossible had happened. He had adapted. The lightning was no longer hers alone. Power surged through his body, raw and unstable, yet unmistakably his own. Zeke exhaled slowly. Her fury had forced his evolution. He had crossed into the two-star realm. Leica cried out in frustration and lunged again, desperate to reassert control. Zeke faced her calmly. Now infused with lightning, he moved like a living storm. His speed sharpened, muscles responding with volatile force. Though the energy still felt wild beneath his skin, he instinctively understood that mastery would not take long. From the edge of the arena, Langus could barely follow their exchange. It soon became evident Zeke was avoiding every strike with ease. Leica's frustration deepened into something harsher. She could no longer tell whether she was fighting an equal or being measured. Yet there was no mockery in his eyes, only recognition. Driven to extremes, she unleashed a wide-scale attack, flooding the battlefield with crackling arcs of lightning that tore across stone and air alike. Zeke slipped through it effortlessly. Enough, he decided. A faint smile touched his lips. There was something he had not done in a very long time. Create. Here. Now. In the middle of combat, Leica hesitated, confusion flickering across her face. Zeke vanished. In the next heartbeat, he appeared directly before her. Lightning converged around him as he struck. Dragon-slaying arts. Tempest of thunder. A violent storm erupted outward, bolts descending from every direction at once. The force engulfed Leica completely, swallowing her in blinding light. When it faded, she was on her knees. Defeated, the duel had ended. Breathing ragged, she crawled toward her fallen sword, refusing to accept what had happened. The dream she had carried for years, to surpass her brothers, to claim leadership of the Eldragon family, felt as though it were slipping beyond reach. Zeke approached without hostility. "You're strong," he said evenly. He meant it. The battle had been worthwhile, not because of dominance, but because he had gained something invaluable, growth. To him, the duel had never been trivial. Leica could only stare up at him, face flushed, thoughts in chaos. The distance between them felt immeasurable. Several hours later, far from the academy, Bala Eldragon advanced through a subterranean dungeon. Monsters fell before him in waves. Even the first stage of his dragon combat arts was sufficient to annihilate everything in his path. His movements were precise, his breathing controlled, his expression unchanged. A messenger arrived mid-battle, kneeling to report that Leica had broken through to the two-star realm. Bala listened, and showed no reaction at all. The messenger continued, carefully emphasizing just how remarkable Leica's breakthrough was. At her age, reaching the two-star realm placed her among the most gifted of her generation. Some even predicted she could achieve 5 stars before graduating from the academy. Bala Eldragon's expression did not change. To him, potential was a hollow word. Talent meant nothing if it had not been tempered by genuine battle. Praise without bloodshed carried no weight. Then the messenger delivered the remainder of the report. Leica had been defeated in a duel. Bala assumed it must have been the work of an upper-year student. It was not. Her opponent had been his illegitimate son, Zeke. For the first time, Bala's movements stilled. A long-buried memory surfaced, of a woman with uncommon promise. The woman who had carried that child, she had vanished before the boy was even born, leaving no explanation behind. Bala frowned faintly. How had the boy developed such refined combat instincts without instruction, without factional backing, without a master? When the messenger added that Zeke had advanced to the two-star realm entirely on his own, something shifted in Bala's gaze. Interest. Then came his decision. "It is time," he said coldly, "to begin the first trial." The messenger hesitated. The trial in question had a reputation. Few passed it unscathed, and some did not return at all. Bala cut him off. The weak serve no purpose. If he cannot survive, he is not worth preserving. Before dismissing the man, Bala gave one final command: summon Ephra. I want her to oversee the trial personally. The messenger bowed and departed. Alone once more in the dungeon corridor, Bala's severe expression eased, just slightly. Curiosity had taken root. For the first time, Bala Elragan wondered what his son might truly become. The following morning, the Academy's training grounds buzzed with activity. Students practiced the newly introduced dragon combat arts beneath their tutor's watchful eye. The technique, attributed to the 15th head of the Elragan family, had been refined and simplified so that even young initiates could grasp its fundamentals. Most focused diligently on memorizing forms and regulating their ether. Zeke did not. Several paces away, he hoisted boulders that outweighed him several times over. Muscles tightened and released with measured rhythm as he concentrated on strengthening his physical foundation instead. To him, dragon combat arts, like Dragon's Breath, had been intentionally streamlined for accessibility. It was practical, but incomplete. Langus eventually approached, brow furrowed in confusion. Why aren't you practicing the technique? Zeke did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped behind Langis and delivered a precise strike between his shoulder blades. Not to injure, but to guide. A controlled stream of ether flowed through Langis' meridians. Instantly, Langis felt the difference. His energy circulation smoothed, instability vanished. The flow felt balanced, almost effortless. His eyes widened. Zeke withdrew his hand, unimpressed. Dragon combat arts were not crude in his view. They were layered systems refined across generations, each era polishing efficiency and depth. But understanding their structure required more than rote repetition. As he resumed lifting, his thoughts drifted to the form that had awakened during his battle with Laika, the perfected state of dragon-slaying arts. How far had it diverged from its ancient origin? The question lingered. For now, he set it aside and returned to strengthening his body. Before he could continue, Langus stepped forward again, gathering what courage he could. Train me, he said earnestly. No matter how difficult it is, I want to become stronger. The request caught Zeke slightly off guard. He studied Langus quietly. The hesitation that once defined the boy had begun to fade. In its place stood determination. After a brief pause, Zeke nodded. Langus's face lit up instantly, excitement replacing anxiety. But the moment did not remain private for long. Another presence approached. Laika stood a short distance away, posture rigid yet resolute. Though traces of embarrassment from her defeat still lingered in her expression, her gaze held no hesitation. She stepped forward. I want you to train me as well. The admission cost her pride, but she did not waver. Losing had broken something within her, yet it had also forged something new. She wanted strength, enough to surpass her brothers, enough to secure her claim as heir, and one day perhaps enough to surpass him. Zeke regarded her in silence. Laika waited, tension coiling in her chest as she awaited his answer. When Zeke did not respond immediately to Laika's request, she narrowed her eyes slightly. Are you certain you're willing? She asked. You're also a candidate for the Elragan succession. Langus quickly backed her up. Regardless of circumstances, Zeke was still Bala Elragan's son. Illegitimate or not, that blood alone placed him among the heirs, whether he desired it or not. Zeke finally spoke. I don't object. His gaze shifted briefly over Laika's posture. But your body hasn't fully recovered. The injuries you sustained should require at least a month of rest. Laika shook her head. She had already taken a high-grade recovery elixir. Zeke exchanged a glance with Langus, skeptical. Langus clarified in a low voice that if Zeke meant the standard potion distributed during the entrance exam, it would never have healed wounds of that severity. As the daughter of a primary branch, Laika had access to rare restorative drafts far beyond what ordinary students could obtain. Zeke exhaled quietly. This era continued to exceed his expectations in certain areas. Laika admitted that without the elixir she would have been confined to bed for weeks. Even so, her request remained unchanged. She knew Zeke needed to pursue his own advancement, yet she still wanted his guidance. Zeke agreed without hesitation. He had never turned away someone who genuinely sought strength. Both Laika and Langus blinked in surprise at how easily he consented. They teased him lightly, pointing out that he was their age, not some seasoned master. Zeke accepted the remark with calm indifference. Then he looked at Laika. Are you certain? He asked. You'd train under the one who defeated you. Her answer came without delay. If I want to become the next head of the Elragan family, pride is a luxury I cannot afford. Strength mattered more than wounded dignity. Zeke remembered the first day they met, how boldly she had declared her ambition. Now, curiosity stirred. Why cling to that goal so fiercely, he asked. Laika's expression hardened. If I fail, she said evenly, I become a bargaining piece. Silence followed. She explained further. Without claiming leadership, she would be married off to strengthen alliances or preserve bloodlines. In the best case, a distant relative. In the worst, a complete stranger. Zeke's eyes darkened. The Elragan bloodline, particularly within the four great branches, was treated as something sacred, valuable, controlled, traded. Purity of source power was guarded obsessively. A sudden pressure radiated outward from Zeke. Langus felt it immediately and shivered. The anger was unmistakable. To Zeke, such traditions were rotten remnants of a decayed legacy. Reducing people to tools for political preservation was intolerable. Quietly, he made a vow to himself: those customs would not endure forever. Before the tension could deepen, movement drew their attention. Several instructors approached the training grounds. Laika blinked, confused. Zeke suppressed a faint curse under his breath, wondering if his flare of emotion had been noticed. From among the instructors, a woman with striking crimson hair stepped forward. One of the teachers announced that beginning today, a new instructor would oversee their class, someone influential enough to personally supervise their development despite her demanding schedule. As the red-haired woman closed the distance, she reached casually toward Laika. Laika reacted instantly, stepping back. Zeke moved even faster, positioning himself in front of her without hesitation. Langus instinctively clutched at Zeke's sleeve. The woman's lips curved faintly. Sharp instincts, she remarked, eyes assessing Laika. Your aura is well refined. Zeke frowned slightly. He had not sensed her presence until she stood directly before them. Langus swallowed and asked who she was. The instructors answered. Ephra, member of the Black Dragon Corps. Ephra greeted the class with composed confidence before turning her gaze to Zeke. Her eyes were sharp, measuring. So you're Zeke, she said. You didn't react when I approached. Zeke met her stare evenly. There was nothing to react to. Then, after a brief pause, he added, your footwork is sophisticated. The concealment is well executed. A flicker of surprise crossed Ephra's eyes. In that instant, she understood why Bala Elragan had shown interest in this boy. Meanwhile, Zeke observed her carefully. Her source power did not circulate in a common pattern. Instead, it flowed downward, gathering densely around her lower body in a structure he did not recognize. That explained the silence in her steps. His curiosity sharpened. What discipline was that? Ephra turned back to the class. From today onward, she announced, I will be your instructor. Shock rippled through the students. The name Tempest Wind was well known within the family. Another instructor confirmed what many already suspected. Ephra was a 6-star warrior of the Black Dragon Corps, the elite force serving directly under the family head. Murmurs spread in disbelief. Why would someone of her rank personally oversee a group of academy students? Zeke remained silent, but his interest had deepened considerably. Ephra's lips curved faintly as the whispers spread across the courtyard. I will train you, she said calmly, but only after you pass a trial. The murmuring grew louder. She raised a hand, silencing them with little effort. It isn't complicated. Each of you will receive a crystal identical to mine. Your task is to survive 1 month in Poison Dragon Mountain while keeping it intact. At the name alone, Langus's complexion drained of color. Recognition. Poison Dragon Mountain was infamous. A territory dense with toxic flora and venomous beasts. Even grazing the wrong vine could end an unprotected life in moments. The land itself felt saturated with death. In another lifetime, Zeke had used that very mountain as a training ground. Even so, he considered the assignment merciless for students their age. Ephra continued, outlining the rules with clinical precision. Each student would carry a crystal orb. If it were lost, stolen, or shattered, that student would be expelled immediately from the dragon's nest. The poison is not your greatest enemy, she added. As long as your dragon's breath remains stable, most toxins will fail to overwhelm you. But if your breathing falters, or you lose your orb, your chances of survival diminish sharply. Laika spoke up, her voice steady. And the monsters? They are sustenance, Ephra replied without warmth. If you cannot kill them, you will not last long regardless. A chill settled over the group. Many doubted whether their foundational combat technique, Strike Dragon, was even strong enough to wound such creatures. The reality of the trial began to sink in. An unease spread visibly. Ephra offered no reassurance. You have 5 days to prepare, she said. Within that time, you may select one basic weapon art from the Elragan archives. Mastery will increase your odds. Failure will not be excused. Someone timidly asked whether outside assistance would be permitted. Ephra's gaze hardened. This is the Dragon's Nest, the heart of the Elragan family. Weaklings are not preserved here. They are removed. Silence followed. Langus looked close to panic. Laika stood still, her thoughts clearly turning over the implications. Zeke's brow furrowed faintly. The ruthless creed unsettled him. Was this truly the same Elragan lineage he had once ruled, or had something essential been lost over time? The briefing concluded. Manuals detailing various weapon disciplines were distributed across a long table. Choose carefully, Ephra instructed. Langus lingered uncertainly, glancing from scroll to scroll. Zeke spoke quietly. Take the spear art. You handled it well during the entrance examination. Relief flickered across Langus's face. He nodded and retrieved the spear manual without hesitation. Leica initially reached for a greatsword technique, confident in her lightning-based swordsmanship. Zeke stopped her. An axe art would suit you better, he said. It will force you to correct your stance and regulate your output. Your power surges too sharply. She studied him for a moment, then withdrew her hand from the greatsword text and chose the axe manual instead. Trust. Despite everything. Once all choices were finalized, Ephra reminded them again that their lives would depend on what they achieved in the next 5 days. She turned to depart, then paused. There is one more detail, she said. The courtyard grew still. Senior students will also enter the mountain. Confusion flickered, then alarm. Their objective will be to hunt you, Ephra continued evenly. They will take your orbs if they can. Shock rippled outward. The upperclassmen were nearly a decade older, many at least one full star beyond them in strength. In this trial, the newcomers would be prey. Though the mountain's vast terrain offered places to hide, pursuit would be relentless. With that final statement, Ephra left them. Langus stood rigid, fear plain in his expression. Surviving poisonous beasts alone had been terrifying enough. Now they would also need to evade stronger, more experienced hunters. Leica assessed the situation with measured calm. Every senior possessed at least a 1-star advantage. If multiple attacked together, escape would not be guaranteed. Zeke remained quiet. His thoughts were already moving ahead. Poison Dragon Mountain. Hunters. 1 month. A dangerous trial, certainly. But not impossible. Zeke considered the situation briefly before offering a practical solution. They should move in small units, pairs or trios. Cooperation was not prohibited, and survival in Poison Dragon Mountain would demand shared watch, shared combat, and shared provisions. When Longest asked what he intended to do, Zeke answered plainly. He would go alone. To him, the trial was not something to shrink from. It was an experience to confront directly. Leica only shook her head. She had expected nothing less. Before returning to preparation, Zeke casually suggested they eat first. Training and strategy meant little on an empty stomach. 5 days passed swiftly. At dawn on the appointed day, the students assembled at the foot of Poison Dragon Mountain. Fog curled around its slopes like living breath. Their faces carried a mixture of tension and resolve. Ephra stood before them, crimson hair gleaming under the sun, presence unwavering. With a single steady declaration, she announced the beginning of the trial. Beside Leica, Langus swallowed hard. Though he had followed Zeke's advice and joined a team, doubt gnawed at him. He was a commoner. He had not yet awakened his first star. Did he truly belong at Leica's side? His spiraling thoughts were interrupted when Raymond and Selena approached, both wearing strange smiles. Selena admitted she still found it hard to believe she had been chosen. As a commoner from the East Hall, she had expected to be overlooked. Raymond shared the same uncertainty. Leica answered them without hesitation. Bloodline held no weight in her decision. She had chosen them for their ability and reliability, not their heritage. The words steadied Longus. He tightened his grip on his spear and slowed his breathing. He would not drag the team down. Raymond nodded firmly, matching that resolve. Leica trusted every member she had selected. Eventually, her gaze shifted towards Zeke. She studied him carefully, fully aware he intended to enter alone. Zeke met her eyes with quiet certainty. His expression said everything. This was precisely the kind of trial he had been waiting for. Selena watched him with open astonishment. The thought of facing Poison Dragon Mountain without allies seemed unthinkable. Raymond, arms folded, muttered that perhaps such confidence came from lineage. After all, both Zeke and Leica descended from family heads. Leica dismissed the notion almost immediately. Even with a capable team, she felt genuine tension about what lay ahead. Joining Zeke would not ease that. Zeke tilted his head slightly at her admission. From his perspective, her group was among the most balanced present. Strong offense, reliable defense, and members willing to trust one another. The others exchanged uneasy looks. His casual assessment felt almost absurd given the danger looming beyond the fog-covered ridges. Longus quietly pointed out that fear was perfectly reasonable. Leica pressed him further. Did he truly believe her team would succeed? Yes, Zeke replied without hesitation. Privately, he acknowledged her discernment in choosing her members. With coordination and discipline, they would pass the trial without major difficulty. Langus, sweating despite the cool air, muttered that Zeke's confidence bordered on madness. At that moment, Ephra stepped forward once more. Most students had already formed groups speaking in hushed tones. Those uncertain in their newly selected weapon arts had wisely chosen teamwork over pride. Ephra reiterated the conditions. They were to survive 1 full month within the mountain while safeguarding their crystal orbs. Lose the orb, and expulsion would be immediate. Since every orb was identical, theft was not merely possible. It was part of the design. Tension thickened. Zeke understood instantly. This was not simply endurance training. It was a calculated contest of awareness, strategy, and raw strength. Ephra continued. Once the first years had entered and settled, senior students would follow. Their task would be to track them down and seize their orbs. The upperclassmen reacted with open arrogance. Some laughed. Others boasted about how easily they would overwhelm students who had yet to reach a single star. Their mockery stirred a volatile mix of fear and determination among the newcomers. With the final instructions delivered, Aphra signaled to start. The students surged forward. One after another, they disappeared into the mist that clung to the mountain's slopes. Zeke lingered momentarily. Leica glanced back, her expression restrained but unmistakably concerned. Zeke answered with an easy smile and gave her team a brief wave of reassurance. She nodded, then led her group into the fog. As the last of them vanished, Ephra called Zeke's name. He acknowledged her calmly and walked toward the mountain-shadowed entrance without pause. She watched as his figure dissolved into the white haze. Unusual, she thought. Far too composed for someone his age. That evening, at the encampment established outside Poison Dragon Mountain, unease circulated among the instructors. Quiet discussions broke out around the fires. Several questioned whether the first-year students, so inexperienced many not even one star awakened, could truly endure such a merciless examination. The mountain loomed in the distance, silent and waiting. Ephra appeared outwardly indifferent. From her assessment, most of the venomous creatures inhabiting Poison Dragon Mountain ranked at only 1 or 2 stars. Dangerous, certainly, but within the student's ability to handle. She voiced steady confidence that the majority would survive the month. Yet when the other instructors looked away, her composure shifted almost imperceptibly. There was something else within the mountain. Something sealed, and she knew the seal would not hold forever. When night fell, she gave the signal for the second phase to begin. Under silver moonlight, the senior students advanced. Weapons gleamed coldly in their hands, and predatory anticipation sharpened their expressions. One by one, they disappeared into the fog-drenched slopes. Ephra watched in silence. Soon, the mountain would erupt into chaos. Deep within Poison Dragon Mountain, the hunt commenced. A group of upperclassmen soon found their first target, Zeke. He stood near the lower ridges perfectly still, as if waiting. They laughed at the sight. To them, he looked careless, inexperienced. One raised a crossbow and fired. The bolt sliced through the air and stopped. Zeke caught it between 2 fingers without so much as shifting his stance. The senior stiffened in shock as he calmly snapped the shaft in half. Before they could regroup, he vanished. He reappeared directly in front of them. His gaze sharpened and something almost eager flickered across his face. The roles had reversed. Elsewhere in the mountain, Leica's team was already engaged in battle. Massive amphibious beasts, thick-skinned and wide-mouthed, lunged from marshy ground. Selena brought one down with a clean strike, but another leapt toward her from behind. Raymond moved instantly. His shield rose, absorbing the impact before he drove forward with crushing force. The creature slammed into the dirt, stunned, and was finished with a precise follow-up. Nearby, Langus defeated his own opponent after a tense exchange. Raymond allowed himself a brief smile. Their coordination had sharpened noticeably. Leica observed their teamwork with quiet approval. Confidence spread through Selena and Raymond alike. Then Langus looked past them and froze. A grotesque mound of monster corpses lay scattered across the clearing. At its center stood Leica, calm, unhurried, barely winded. Selena stared in open admiration. Raymond shared the sentiment while the rest of them had struggled against a few beasts. Leica had eradicated the majority alone. She brushed aside their praise. These were nothing more than a warm-up, she said evenly. As a 2-star warrior, such creatures posed minimal threat. She did, however, acknowledge her teammates' growth. Since the entrance exam, both Selena and Raymond had awakened their first stars. A significant step forward. Selena expressed heartfelt gratitude. Raymond accepted the recognition with restrained pride. Langus lowered his gaze. He alone remained without a star. Selena noticed immediately. She reminded him gently that progress did not follow the same pace for everyone. Raymond echoed her encouragement, urging patience and persistence. Their words eased the tightness in his chest. Leica added her own reminder. Star or not, Langus had already defeated multiple giant frog beasts on his own. Under Zeke's guidance, his spear techniques had refined dramatically. His first awakening was only a matter of time. Emotion swelled unexpectedly within him. As dusk deepened into night, Leica glanced toward the darkening sky. It was time to withdraw. Poison Dragon Mountain grew far more lethal after sunset. They began to move, and she stopped abruptly. Her expression hardened. A figure lingered near their temporary base. From the tall grass stepped a senior student, a self-assured smile tugging at his lips. Selena and Raymond reacted instantly, weapons drawn. Leica recognized him at once. His intent was obvious. Before words could be exchanged, 3 more upperclassmen emerged from concealment. Each radiated the unmistakable presence of a 1-star warrior. Their leader stepped forward. The target was clear. their crystal orbs. Without warning, he lunged at Leica. She sidestepped smoothly and instructed her team to maintain defensive formation. She would handle him herself. Langus soon found himself engaged with another senior. His opponent mocked him relentlessly, sneering at the sight of a starless student daring to resist. For a split second, doubt crept in. Then memory steadied him. Zeke's voice echoed in his mind. Surrender is rational only when the gap is overwhelming. Against someone near your level, victory lies in endurance. Do not chase an opening, wait for it. Longi slowed his breathing. He stopped forcing attacks. He endured. Blow after blow landed against his guard, but he did not panic. He focused solely on surviving each exchange. His opponent grew irritated. Aggression replaced discipline. And then, in a single overcommitted strike, the senior exposed himself. Langus moved without hesitation. Langus steadied his breathing. He tightened his grip on the spear, adjusted his footing, and thrust forward with everything he had cultivated: discipline, endurance, and relentless practice. The strike drove cleanly through his opponent's defense. The senior student gasped, staggered backward, and collapsed as consciousness slipped away. As the body struck the ground, a gentle radiance bloomed from Langus's chest. A star ignited. Leica saw it instantly. Her eyes widened slightly. He had not awakened through comfort or instruction, but in the crucible of real combat, through restraint and perseverance. Across the clearing, the senior leader faltered. Though he too possessed 2 stars, he could not comprehend why Leica's strength so thoroughly outmatched his own. Leica understood the difference. Since adopting the axe techniques Zeke had urged her to study, her command over momentum and weight had sharpened. Even when wielding her greatsword, her strikes now carried deeper cohesion, force flowing cleanly from stance to blade. This was not chance, it was refinement. Golden lightning began to coil around her weapon, arcs snapping through the air. She advanced without hesitation. One decisive swing, his guard shattered. The battle ended in an instant. When the final opponent fell, Leica returned to her team and quickly assessed their condition. No critical injuries. Relief broke over them like a wave. Laughter and cheers followed, raw and unrestrained. They had faced upperclassmen and prevailed. Selena and Raymond turned toward Langus, grinning openly as they congratulated him on awakening his first star. He met their smiles, pride swelling in his chest. For the first time, he stood beside them not as the weakest, but as an equal. Leica surveyed her team quietly. Every member had now awakened at least 1 star. The path ahead remained dangerous, but far more manageable. Still, her gaze drifted toward the mountain's deeper reaches. She could not help wondering how Zeke fared alone. Elsewhere, deeper in the forest, one of the senior students ran blindly through tangled undergrowth. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Tears streaked her face. Only one image repeated in her mind: Zeke. Whatever he was, it was not something she had expected to encounter. Moments later, disorder rippled through the upperclassmen ranks. They scattered in panic, shouting warnings and calling for reinforcements, hoping desperately that he would not continue chasing them. Instinct overpowered arrogance. Zeke moved through the forest at an unhurried pace. One unconscious senior dragged behind him, boots scraping against dirt and stone. Each measured step carried the quiet certainty of a predator. Over his shoulder hung the enormous corpse of a serpent-like beast, its massive body swaying casually with his stride. The sight alone shattered what remained of their composure. The fleeing students cursed under their breath, unable to understand how the situation had reversed so completely. They had entered the mountain as hunters. Now they were prey. Zeke's expression held a faint, unsettling amusement, as though the unfolding chaos were little more than a diversion. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen," one of them muttered before bolting deeper into the trees. Suddenly, another senior stumbled and fell hard against the forest floor. He scrambled to his feet and froze. Zeke stood directly before him. Beneath the dim canopy, a faint crimson glimmer touched his eyes. There was no anger in his expression, only boredom. He extended a hand almost politely, posture suggesting the fight would resume once the boy regained his footing. The senior's terror broke him first. His eyes rolled back. He collapsed unconscious without a single strike exchanged. Zeke blinked. He tilted his head slightly puzzled. Where had their earlier bravado gone? Moments ago they had laughed and boasted. Now they fled at the mere sight of him. "Don't give up so easily," he murmured lightly. Then, something shifted. A presence. Subtle, concealed. Zeke's gaze sharpened. He turned toward the darkness between the trees. "I know you're there," his posture implied, openly acknowledging the watcher and inviting them closer. Silence answered him. A quiet chuckle escaped his lips. If he was merely being observed, there was no longer any need for restraint. The faint playfulness drained from his expression. His demeanor hardened. The game, it seemed, had changed. From the cover of the trees, a figure finally emerged. He was one of the proctors assigned to oversee the examination from a distance. Sweat traced down his temples as he stared at Zeke, unable to mask his shock. The reports had not prepared him for this. Zeke had not only overwhelmed opponents ranked above him, he had sensed hidden surveillance without effort. The proctor understood at once. This was no ordinary talent. Without lingering another second, He withdrew to deliver his findings. At the examination camp beyond Poison Dragon Mountain, Ephra received the updates in composed silence. A week had passed since the trial's commencement. Nearly one-third of the first-year students had already forfeited. The rest were gradually adjusting to the mountain's poisonous terrain. This fell well within her projections. When she inquired about the upperclassmen, however, the observers hesitated. Uneasy glances passed between them before one finally spoke. The seniors were retreating. Ephra's brows drew together faintly. There were no creatures within the mountain capable of driving trained upperclassmen into full retreat. She demanded clarification. The answer was simple. They were fleeing from Zeke, not from venomous beasts, not from the toxic mist, from a single lower classman. According to multiple accounts, Zeke had begun hunting them systematically. Initially, they had tried to fight back. Now they scattered at the mere rumor of his presence. Some observers admitted he appeared almost entertained, approaching combat with a smile that unsettled even veteran warriors. He cut through opponents one after another, never losing that unsettling composure. Others nodded grimly. Even as the son of the dragon family head, Zeke felt different. There was something in his aura that did not resemble simple genius. It felt darker, colder, predatory. To them, he was less a prodigy and more a beast disguised in human skin. Ephra absorbed the testimonies without visible reaction. In truth, she had anticipated this. Zeke had entered Poison Dragon Mountain alone, entirely unconcerned with its dangers. That choice alone revealed his intention. He had never planned to evade the upperclassmen. He had planned to pursue them. The memory of their first encounter surfaced in her mind. Those steady, fearless eyes that held no trace of hesitation. Even recalling it sent a faint chill along her spine. Perhaps the rumors were not exaggerated after all. A sudden low rumble echoed faintly across the camp. One of the observers turned, frowning in confusion. Ephra's lips curved slightly. This was precisely what she had been waiting for. A soldier approached and bowed. Where should the cage be placed? She gestured toward an open clearing and dismissed him with approval. When the observers turned, their faces drained of color. A massive iron cage now stood in the clearing. Its interior was swallowed in shadow. From within came a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the air itself. The pressure radiating from the cage was unmistakable. 3-star, far beyond the level any examinee should reasonably confront. Questions erupted at once. What kind of creature was sealed inside? Was releasing such a monster not reckless? Ephra remained composed. The beast had been conditioned, she explained. It would only attack individuals whose strength reached 2 stars or higher. Weaker students would not draw its aggression. The reassurance did little to ease the tension. One observer demanded to know why it was being released now. She answered that the order came directly from Balso-Dragon. Privately, however, she acknowledged her own motive. She wanted certainty. Whispers were spreading through the soldiers. Whispers that Zeke was something unnatural. If that was true, she intended to see it with her own eyes. Could he withstand a creature of that caliber? Her decision settled. At dawn, she commanded, "Open it." The true examination was about to begin. As the first light of morning filtered through Poison Dragon Mountain, Langus and his team came to an abrupt stop. The ground beneath them trembled. Laika's expression sharpened instantly. A slow unease crept up her spine. The vibration felt wrong. Too heavy, too deliberate. Raymond suggested it might be upperclassmen moving in force. Langus shook his head at once. No, his posture implied. This felt nothing like human movement. The weight in the air pressed down on them, thick and suffocating. It did not resemble the wild fury of an ordinary monster. Laika felt it immediately. This presence carried something steadier, more deliberate. Then the earth convulsed again. The second tremor was violent enough to split the forest's silence apart. A towering tree groaned, cracked at its base, and toppled toward them. Laika's instincts ignited. She barked a command and forced the team to scatter just as the trunk crashed down, dirt and splinters erupting in all directions. When the dust began to thin, they turned and froze. A colossal figure emerged from the settling haze. It stood higher than the canopy itself, a massive construct of ancient stone, shaped into humanoid form. Faint light glimmered within hollowed eyes as they fixed upon the students. The ground quaked with each step it took. Fear settled into their bones. Of Poison Dragon Mountain, Zeke sat atop a mound of fallen beasts and defeated upperclassmen. Bodies lay scattered like discarded armor across the clearing. He rested his elbow on one knee, chin propped against his hand, surveying the scene with mild disinterest. The excitement of the trial had evaporated hours ago. No senior dared approach him anymore. No one tried to reclaim lost pride. Even the unseen observers had withdrawn their scrutiny. It was as though they had silently conceded that Zeke existed outside their control. The stillness grated on him. He considered whether to sleep or seek new amusement. Then something brushed against his senses. A distant ripple. Zeke straightened slightly. The aura originated from the mountain's opposite end. At first he assumed it to be another 2-star creature. But as he concentrated, the pressure sharpened. Heavier, older, oppressive. 3-star. A faint flicker of surprise crossed his face. Such beings were never intended to appear during examinations. Poison Dragon Mountain was dangerous, yes, but it was managed. Allowing a creature of that level to roam unchecked bordered on negligence. Perhaps it had slumbered deep within the mountain for centuries, undisturbed until now. If so, the trial was already descending into chaos. The thought irritated him. Even Leica, talented as she was, would struggle against something of that magnitude. The instructors should have ensured nothing like this remained. Then another possibility surfaced. What if it had been left intentionally? What if this was a test? Zeke dismissed the speculation with a quiet exhale. Whatever the reason, one fact was certain. He was no longer bored. The aura lingered, distant and unaware of him. That amused him. Waiting had never suited his nature. A faint smile curved his lips as he rose from the pile of defeated challengers and began walking toward the source, unhurried and confident. Back in Leica's clearing, Selena moved first. She poured all her strength into a full-force strike, her weapon slicing through the air before crashing against the golem's stone body. The impact rang like metal against a mountain. The creature did not move, not even a tremor. Selena stumbled back, disbelief flashing across her face. Raymond charged next, driving his shield forward with everything he had. The collision sent a shockwave rippling through the trees. The golem remained unmoved. Pain surged through Raymond's arms as the force rebounded into him. Only then did Leica step forward. Lightning coiled around her blade as she refined her focus. She did not strike with brute strength. She aimed with precision. Her sword connected. A faint line etched itself across the golem's arm. Shallow, but real. Leica understood instantly. Only someone at 2-star level could damage it at all. Her teammate's strength simply could not penetrate its hardened exterior. Langus looked to her for instruction. Without turning away from the towering enemy, Leica made her decision clear through sharp gestures and steady resolve. She would draw its attention. They would retreat. Langus rejected the idea immediately. Leaving her behind was unthinkable. Raymond stepped forward despite the pain in his arms, arguing that even if they lacked the power to wound it, they could create openings. Coordination could compensate for raw strength. Selena agreed. Timing and distraction still had value. Leica's expression softened at their resolve. They would not abandon her. After a brief pause, she nodded. Lightning gathered once more along her blade. Raymond planted his shield and braced himself. Langus and Selena adjusted their grips, ready to strike. The instant opportunity revealed itself. Leica moved first. The golem reacted, its enormous arms sweeping toward her. Raymond leapt into its path, catching the blow against his shield. The impact was catastrophic. He staggered backward, boots carving trenches in the soil as he barely held his ground. Longus and Selena attacked from opposite flanks. Their strikes failed to crack stone, but they succeeded in dividing the creature's attention. That moment, that single heartbeat, was enough. Leica slipped behind it. Lightning surged violently along her blade as she poured every remaining fragment of source power into one final technique: Heaven's Thunder. The strike detonated upon impact. A blinding explosion tore through the clearing. The forest shuddered. Trees bent under the shock wave as searing light ripped across the air. When the dust settled, silence followed. Langus rushed to Leica's side, catching her as her strength gave out. She remained uninjured, but utterly drained. Not a trace of source power lingered within her. Selena moved to support Raymond, who confirmed through clenched teeth that he could still stand. Leica inhaled slowly, preparing to order their withdrawal. Then her eyes sharpened. The oppressive presence had not disappeared. Before anyone could process the realization, she shoved Langus out of the way. A colossal hand of stone closed around Leica before she could fully recover her balance. The golem lifted her as though she weighed nothing. It was still moving. Shock tore through the group. After the explosion of Heaven's Thunder, after all that force, how could it still stand? Selena stared, unable to comprehend it. Langus reacted first. Panic drowned reason as he charged, spear leveled. But the golem swung Leica's body between them like a living shield. Langus skidded to a halt, horror freezing his limbs. Desperation tightened around them, and then the forest roared. A massive tree trunk hurtled through the air, spinning like a siege weapon. It struck the golem with crushing force. Stone cracked. The creature's grip faltered. Leica was flung free. Langus lunged and caught her before she struck the ground, dragging her clear as the golem staggered under the unexpected blow. Dazed, Leica tried to make sense of what had happened. Then she felt it, a presence she knew. Zeke stepped from between the trees. He did not rush to her side. His gaze settled immediately on the towering construct instead. Interest flickered across his features, and a faint, almost pleased smile curved his lips as he studied the clay-like mass of ancient stone. Moments earlier, he had seen the golden flare of lightning split the distant tree line. He had recognized it at once. Leica, realizing her team had encountered the 3-star creature first, he had accelerated without hesitation. In another life, the distance would have been trivial. Now, every stride reminded him of his reduced state. The gap between his former peak and his current limitations irritated him with each heavy step. Even so, he pressed on, Mid-run, inspiration struck. He diverted, seized the trunk of a towering tree, and channeled strength through refined movement rather than brute excess. Soil exploded outward as he wrenched it free. With controlled rotation and precise circulation of source power, he hurled the trunk like a colossal javelin. The impact had exceeded expectations. A subtle smile touched his lips. It was a newly acquired technique, the nurturing dragon-throwing art. Foundational, efficient, focused on structure and flow rather than destruction. Simple, but ideal for his present condition. Still, he understood the truth. A thrown tree would not end a 3-star golem. So he continued forward. When Zeke entered the clearing, Langus rushed toward him, disbelief plain on his face. Zeke scanned the group once. Quick, efficient, all alive. Langus brushed off their injuries, insisting the real threat still stood before them. Zeke's attention sharpened as he studied the creature. Golem. The word formed in his thoughts, yet something was off. The pressure it emitted was immense, but he sensed no living core, no heartbeat, no vitality. Only dense energy bound into stone. The construct rose from broken earth like an awakened titan. Without warning, it lunged. Laika and Langus flinched instinctively, but Zeke did not step back. He raised one hand. The golem's massive fist collided with his palm. The ground beneath Zeke's feet fractured, cracks racing outward in jagged lines. Trees shuddered from the impact. Zeke did not move. Calmly, he assessed the resistance beneath his fingers. The stone shell was exceptionally durable. Grinding it down with pure physical force would be inefficient. To pierce it properly would require aura. With casual indifference, he redirected the arm and cast it aside. Laika, pale and drained, could only stare. Langus stood frozen. After everything they had endured, Zeke regarded the monster as if it were an inconvenience. The golem recovered and attacked again. This time, Zeke met the strike head-on. The collision detonated through the forest. Shockwaves rippled outward, trunks trembled, and loose earth cascaded from shattered ground. Yet even while blocking, Zeke's thoughts remained clear. The clearing was too open, too exposed. If the battle continued here, Laika's team would inevitably be caught in the aftermath. He created a brief opening, just enough. Laika understood first. Despite her exhaustion, she forced herself up. Raymond and Selena moved with her, pulling Longis back across the fractured terrain. They did not stop until distance and debris separated them from the clash. Only when Zeke confirmed they were beyond immediate danger did his posture shift. His full attention settled upon the golem. The faint trace of amusement faded from his expression. Now the real fight could begin. Zeke lowered his stance and anchored his feet into the fractured ground. Power coiled through his legs as he twisted sharply at the waist, releasing the stored force in a single explosive motion. The golem's massive body left the earth. It hurtled across the clearing like a projectile, smashing through scattered boulders, tearing up slabs of stone, and carving deep trenches into the soil before finally grinding to a halt. As the construct struggled to rise from the wreckage, Zeke watched closely. Its outer frame was extraordinarily tough. That only sharpened his interest. Aura ignited around his fists as he surged forward, speed blurring his figure. A question formed in his mind. If the shell was this resilient, what of the interior? He leapt. For a fraction of a second, he hovered above the towering figure. Then he executed the first form of the dragon destruction combat art. Burst World. His fist descended. The moment it connected, light detonated outward in a violent surge. The forest convulsed. Stone fragments erupted in all directions as the golem's armored exterior shattered under the concentrated blast. But the true damage occurred beneath the surface. Rather than eroding the creature piece by piece, Burst World forced condensed source power directly into its structure, rupturing it from within. Cracks raced through the golem's body, its core destabilized. The enormous frame split apart and collapsed in ruin. Silence followed. Zeke exhaled slowly, a faint thrill running through him. The technique had performed exactly as intended. Ending the fight so decisively stirred something long dormant within him. For the first time in weeks, he had enjoyed himself. 1 month later, within the heart of the Eldrian estate, Zeke walked through expansive marble corridors draped with ancient tapestries. His expression was faintly irritated. Training had been interrupted by a summons he had no desire to answer. The reason was simple. The Poison Dragon Mountain examination had concluded. Despite the unexpected appearance of the 3-star golem, no further mass casualties had occurred. Still, the trial severity had been merciless. Of the 7-year-old candidates who entered, only 30% survived the month. Every one of those survivors, however, had advanced to 1-star rank through relentless exposure to danger. Zeke now walked beside Ephria, who explained the situation in a low voice. His conduct during the examination had drawn the attention of the entire family leadership. It was not merely disruptive, it had overturned the structure of the trial itself. The upperclassmen phase had been designed as a hunt, senior students targeting lowerclassmen to seize their crystal orbs. Instead, Zeke had inverted the hierarchy. He hunted them. Every upperclassman who confronted him had been defeated. Not one succeeded in taking an orb. The humiliation was unprecedented. Though he had broken no written rule, no one had imagined a lowerclassman would dare such an act. Ephria warned him carefully. His disregard for rank and open defiance had placed him under scrutiny. The family head would not treat the matter lightly. As they approached the towering doors of the master's office, she urged him to measure his words. A careless remark before the head of the dragon family could cost him dearly. Zeke remained unmoved. Ephria knocked firmly and announced their arrival with strict formality, stating that she had brought Zeke as ordered. A deep, commanding voice granted entry. Inside, Balsa El Ragan completed the final stroke of his writing before lifting his gaze. His eyes settled on Zeke, cold, steady, and weighted with authority. He addressed the issue immediately. Zeke's assault on the upperclassmen. Zeke stood without visible concern. If anything, he appeared mildly inconvenienced rather than intimidated. Instead of apologizing, he asked a simple question. Had any rule explicitly forbidden him from attacking upperclassmen? Balsa's eyes narrowed. Zeke continued evenly. The stated conditions of the examination had been survival for 1 month within Poison Dragon Mountain and the protection of one's crystal orb. No additional restrictions had been declared. Within those parameters, he had acted freely. If certain behaviors were unacceptable, then such limits should have been clearly defined beforehand. As his words continued, Ephria felt her blood run cold. The bluntness of his reasoning sounded dangerously close to provocation. Before she could intervene, Balsa's restraint snapped. A crushing dragon aura erupted outward. The pressure was immediate and suffocating. Ephria collapsed to her knees, trembling as the overwhelming force pressed down on her. Breathing became a struggle. She was certain that if the aura intensified even slightly more, Zeke would be obliterated. Yet he did not bend. The immense pressure washed over him like a strong gust of wind. He remained standing, unaffected. The contrast was so stark that Ephria could barely comprehend it. A faint irritation flickered across Zeke's face. He tilted his head slightly, displeased by the attempt at intimidation. Balsa's expression darkened. Still kneeling, Ephria struggled for air as Zeke spoke again, bluntly asking whether he had been summoned merely to address trivial accusations. The aura withdrew. Silence settled. Balsa regained composure, but his focus had sharpened considerably. According to the examination reports, Zeke had not only subdued upperclassmen, he had also destroyed a 3-star golem. Such an achievement should have been impossible for someone of his age and rank. More troubling still, he had remained completely steady under the full force of the dragon family head's aura. Balsa's gaze hardened. He demanded the truth. How could a child born beyond the formal line of succession wield strength so far beyond his years? Zeke did not flinch beneath the scrutiny. He met his father's eyes directly and asked, almost calmly, whether Balsa truly wished to understand the source of that power. Then he gave his answer. He simply stated that his strength came from being himself, nothing more. For a brief moment, Balsa had no reply. Silence settled over the chamber, thick, strained, burdened by history neither of them voiced aloud. The distance between father and son felt far greater than the span of polished marble separating them. At last, Balsa exhaled slowly. The reports had not exaggerated. Zeke's temperament was indeed difficult. Even so, achievement could not be denied. Whatever his attitude, he had destroyed a 3-star golem. That alone warranted acknowledgement. Balsa declared that Zeke would receive a reward of his choosing. He could either claim a single treasure from the dragon treasury, or gain entry to the 2nd level of the dragon hall. Ephria's breath caught. Both places were sacred to the dragon family. Since the time of the founding patriarch, Gilasargon, they had safeguarded the clan's most valuable legacies. The dragon hall preserved ancient texts, some so dangerous they had been sealed away. The treasury housed relics of former family heads, legendary weapons, rare elixirs, priceless artifacts, and heirlooms beyond measure. Access was reserved for only the most extraordinary. Yet despite Zeke's open defiance, Balsa was offering him such privilege. Zeke showed no sign of appreciation. Instead, he remarked lightly that a reward should not be given halfway. If he was to be compensated, there was little reason not to grant both. The refusal was immediate, only one. With that, Balsa signaled dismissal. Ephria prepared to withdraw, but Zeke did not move. He lifted a hand slightly as if the conversation were not yet finished. Alarm shot through Ephria. Before he could speak further, she stepped in quickly, forcing composure. She bowed and offered formal gratitude in his place, apologizing for any offense, then seized his arm and began guiding him toward the exit. As she pulled him away, Zeke delivered one final statement. If Balsa continued suppressing his emotions so rigidly, he said, then no matter how refined his techniques or how vast his strength, he would never truly grow stronger. The word struck. Balsa's fury surged. His dragon aura flared violently, filling the chamber, but only for a heartbeat. A different presence answered it. Zeke's divine dragon aura rose effortlessly and smothered the outburst as though extinguishing a spark. Ephria trembled. She pleaded under her breath for him to stop as she forced him through the doorway. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off the suffocating pressure within. The moment they stepped into the corridor, Ephria's restraint collapsed. She turned on him, anger and disbelief breaking through her discipline. After all her warnings, he had shown open disrespect to the master head of the family. His behavior violated every structure of hierarchy the Dragon clan upheld. Zeke blinked, faintly puzzled. From his perspective, he had already been restrained. That response nearly made her stumble. How could he treat instructors and elders with measured courtesy, yet speak to the family head with such brazen disregard? To Zeke, the reasoning was straightforward. Balsa Elragan was not merely the master of the clan, he was his father. Naturally, he spoke to him differently. Ephria searched for a counterargument and found none. Faced with Zeke's overwhelming strength and his unsettling composure, she could only mutter that he was clearly no ordinary child. Curiosity eventually overpowered her restraint. She asked him who he truly was. Zeke gave the same answer he always did. He was Zeke, nothing more, nothing less. Ephria fell quiet. Every child born into the dragon lineage had been nourished with ancient dragon blood in infancy. Yet not one, never a single heir, had stood unshaken before the aura of the master head. Balsa Elragan carried the authority of a dragon king, an existence superior even among ancient dragons. Zeke should have collapsed beneath that pressure. Instead, he had remained untouched. What kind of being could remain calm before a dragon king? The thought disturbed her more than she wished to admit. Sensing her silence, Zeke glanced at her and casually asked if something was wrong. Ephria dismissed the concern outwardly, but inwardly she had already resolved to examine his birth records in detail. There were answers somewhere. Shifting the subject, she asked which reward he intended to claim. Again, she outlined the options. Entry to the second floor of the Dragon Hall, or one item from the Dragon Treasury. Only one. Zeke asked whether taking both was possible. Her refusal was immediate. After a brief pause, he chose the Dragon Hall. To him, knowledge held greater value than artifacts. He needed to understand the era into which he had been reborn, the advancements in medicine, the evolution of martial paths, the tools and systems shaped by the 1,000 years he had missed. At that moment, Langus arrived, nearly tripping over himself in excitement. The idea of stepping inside the Dragon Hall of the Dragon family felt unreal to him. When Zeke observed his reaction, Langus nodded fervently. The techniques he already practiced, strike dragon combat arts and nurturing dragon spear arts, were powerful. But access to higher-level martial knowledge felt like a dream. Soon after, Leica hurried over, energy radiating from her. She spoke eagerly about making the most of every second inside. Time would be limited. Efficiency would matter. She confirmed that although Zeke had been granted access to the second floor, their group would only enter the first. The borrowing rules were strict. Each person could take only one book out of the hall, but they were free to read as many as they could within the allotted time. Zeke acknowledged this calmly. Leica tilted her head, asking why he had chosen the Dragon Hall over the treasury. She would have expected him to prefer a powerful artifact. He admitted the temptation, but reaffirmed that knowledge was more valuable to him at present. Leica explained that the second floor contained far rarer martial texts, with a vast qualitative gap between levels. Even so, she declared confidently that nothing surpassed her lightning greatsword technique. Zeke did not reply. His attention had already shifted forward. The Dragon Hall towered before them. When they arrived, the Guardian informed them of their allotted time, 5 hours, and reminded them to maintain silence inside. 5 hours. Zeke briefly wondered whether it would be enough. Leica assured him that most were granted far less. The first priority she emphasized was selecting the single volume they would borrow. After that, they should read as widely as possible. Langus mentioned stories of prodigies capable of reading several books at once. His own aim, however, was simpler. He wanted to find a martial path that truly suited him. They stepped inside. The scale of the archive was staggering. Langus and Selena froze, staring in awe at the mythical repository they had only heard about in stories. Endless shelves lined with ancient manuscripts and scrolls stretched farther than the eye could follow. Zeke surveyed the collection carefully. There were far more texts than he had anticipated. A faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps even here he would discover something unfamiliar. Hours passed. He sat surrounded by towering stacks of manuscripts, history pressing in from all sides. The records revealed a past far beyond what he had imagined. Dimensional fractures, foreign realms, powers that shattered the limits he once believed absolute. Even he eventually reached saturation. Leaning back, he exhaled slowly as the weight of nearly a millennium settled over him. 1,000 years had passed without his awareness. Wars, evolution, catastrophes. One account drew his attention above all others. Approximately 900 years ago, a rupture in the dimensional barrier had linked this world to another, the Chaos Realm. That single tear had altered humanity's destiny. Within that foreign realm, monstrous beings known as Chaos roamed freely. To survive, the people there awakened a unique source power within themselves, forged specifically to resist the encroaching corruption. The Dragon family had stood at the forefront of that struggle. Fighting side by side with warriors of the Chaos Realm, they formed bonds on the battlefield. From those bonds, 4 legendary figures, Typhona, Levius, Bahamut, and Fafnald, eventually married into the dragon lineage, forever intertwining the fate of the two worlds. From the unions between the dragon lineage and the warriors of the Chaos Realm, four dominant branches had emerged. Over centuries, those branches solidified their authority and continued to govern the world to the present day. As Zeke absorbed the record, a memory surfaced. The Black Boar. He recalled the strange mist that had cloaked the creature, an energy that had violated every natural law he understood. At the time, it had felt alien, fundamentally misplaced within this world. Now the answer was obvious. That aura had not been elemental. It had not been spiritual. It had been chaos. His thoughts shifted again, this time to Leica's lightning aura. He had always sensed something unstable within it, a resonance that differed from conventional martial force or spiritual cultivation. The inconsistency no longer puzzled him. Her power had not originated solely from this realm. It carried the imprint of another world. Yet among all the revelations, one detail seized his attention more than the rest: magic. The texts described it as an entirely separate system of power, introduced after the connection to the Chaos Realm. It was neither martial art nor spiritual discipline. It was a foreign structure, a new framework layered onto this world like an invasive technology. Curiosity sharpened his focus. Zeke began searching the surrounding shelves for instructional volumes related to this magical system. When he reached the section where such knowledge should logically be stored, his steps slowed. The space was empty. The historical accounts remained, but the practical manuals were gone. Something of that magnitude should not simply vanish. Before he could examine the matter further, a faint whisper brushed through the silent hall. Zeke stilled. There was no presence he could detect, only a voice. He turned, scanning the aisles between towering shelves. Nothing revealed itself. Remaining seated among the open volumes, he assessed the situation carefully. Whatever was responsible was not utilizing any form of energy he recognized. Then the air shifted. A book beside him flipped its pages on its own. Moments later, every manuscript stacked around him rose gently into the air. As they lifted, faint glimmering lines became visible, delicate threads suspended in space, nearly transparent. Someone was manipulating the books through thread-like strands so refined that even Zeke momentarily forgot his surroundings in fascination. The unseen presence whispered again, urging silence. Zeke ignored it. Instead, he reached for the final floating book and traced the threads back with open curiosity, tugging lightly against the invisible control. High above, seated casually along an upper balcony, a hooded figure moved slender fingers with effortless precision. Dozens of tomes drifted in accordance with subtle gestures. Without glancing down, the figure flicked a wrist. Cold pressure wrapped around Zeke instantly. Before he could respond fully, the Guardian's voice echoed through the Dragon Hall, announcing the end of their allotted time. In the same seamless motion, the threads tightened. Zeke was hurled out of the hall. He twisted mid-air, adjusted his balance, and landed smoothly outside the towering structure. Looking back, his eyes gleamed. Not with irritation, but with interest. Whatever had just transpired only strengthened his desire to return. Behind him, Leica and Langus stood stunned, struggling to comprehend what they had witnessed. Zeke brushed dust from his sleeves as though nothing unusual had occurred. To shift attention, he asked about their gains. Langus revealed a spear technique centered on fluid motion and adaptability. Selena had selected a refined sword art built upon speed and precision. Raymond had chosen a defensive shield technique emphasizing structural reinforcement. Zeke listened quietly. Each method traced its origins to foundational martial principles he himself had created long ago. When Leica presented her selection, a great sword art refined by a later family head, Zeke's gaze sharpened slightly. Once again, he recognized the same hand that had once modified his earlier techniques. Amusement flickered across his expression. The Dragon Hall, which he had initially assumed would offer little of interest, had instead become a repository of unresolved mysteries. 5 years passed. Within the eastern wing of the academy, Leica moved quickly through the corridors, scanning each corner. She had already checked the dormitories. There was no sign of Zeke or the others. A passing student informed her that the group had gone to the training grounds. Her unease deepened. They had trained before sunrise. Why return again? Concern tightened in her chest as she hurried across the academy grounds. The moment she stepped through the gates of the training field, she froze. Selena stood at the forefront, sword drawn, posture sharp and unwavering. Beside her, Raymond braced behind his shield, stance anchored for impact. Behind them, Langus rotated his spear with disciplined precision, movements honed and controlled. At the center of their formation stood Zeke. Unarmed, Zeke stood opposite the three of them without the slightest trace of doubt. His posture alone made his intention clear. He meant to face them together. There was no weapon in his hands, no visible preparation, yet he did not look reckless. He looked certain. Elsewhere, within the secluded office of Balsa Elragon, silence pressed heavily against the walls. A thick stack of reports rested on the desk before him. He read through the final pages slowly, expression controlled before placing the documents aside. After a brief pause, he lifted his eyes toward the man waiting across from him. Has it been verified? He asked evenly. Akan, captain of the Black Dragon Corps, stood at attention. His back was straight, his face composed to the point of austerity. It has, Achan replied. Spatial irregularities and concentrated mana fluctuations confirm the formation of a special rift. Current projections estimate an 80% likelihood that a magic tower exists within. Balsa exhaled quietly. Of all possible developments, fate had chosen the most troublesome outcome. The rift had manifested near a magic spring. Magic water, the catalyst that transformed ordinary humans into mages. Those who consumed it developed a rare constitution capable of converting source power into mana. From that transformation emerged entirely new systems of combat, unfamiliar disciplines, and revolutionary warfare strategies. Since its discovery, the structure of civilization itself had shifted, but advancement had not come peacefully. Magic springs became the cause of relentless territorial wars. Entire regions were drenched in blood over their control. In the present era, the number of mages under a great house's command determined its military supremacy, and within Lagan lands, there was not a single natural magic spring. For a house without one, there existed only one path to acquisition: conquering special rifts. At present, the Lagan family possessed only a limited number of mages. Balsa himself was among them. Each had survived previous rift expeditions through strength and fortune alike. Even so, their forces were dangerously outnumbered compared to rival houses that controlled multiple springs. Slowly, steadily, Lagan was being hemmed in by sheer numerical disadvantage. That was why this operation, Special Rift Conquest, had become Balsa's highest strategic priority. Akan continued, "There is an additional complication." He stepped forward and unfurled a detailed map across the desk. Layers of terrain markings, mana flow irregularities, and spatial distortion patterns spread beneath the lamplight. "The rift has formed within the abundant dragon forest," he explained. "The ancient woodland lay largely under Lagan authority. However, a substantial portion overlapped with territory claimed by another great house, the Kerberos family. Unlike Lagan, they asserted their claim aggressively and referred to the same region as the Great Abandoned Forest." Akan pointed toward a marked epicenter glowing faintly on the map. "The initial breach point is within our recognized borders," he stated. "However, due to its scale and instability, the rift's spatial domain will expand." He did not need to elaborate further. Once the distortion widened, it would not respect territorial lines drawn on parchment. Conflict was inevitable, and this time it would not remain contained within the forest. The projected zone of influence spread outward on the map, its boundary creeping dangerously close to Kerberos territory. Akan spoke evenly. Given the temperament of the Kerberos family, the likelihood of interference was extremely high. They were loud, aggressive, quick to assert dominance. Still, he did not dismiss them as mere noise. Once news of the rift became public, confrontation would be inevitable. Spatial rifts naturally imposed heavy limitations, restricting large troop movements, disrupting communication, fracturing coordination. But hesitation would only worsen the situation. If Lagan delayed, Kerberos would seize the initiative. That outcome could not be allowed. Balsa's decision came without pause. All dragon nests under Lagan authority were to be notified immediately. Mobilization would begin at once. A selection examination would determine who qualified to enter the rift. This would not be a simple display of talent. It would be a trial of survival. Back at the academy training grounds, Leica stood with unusual seriousness etched across her face. Opposite her, Zeke appeared completely relaxed. Then, without warning, Langus, Selena, and Raymond moved together. Their auras ignited as they advanced from 3 directions, attacks launched with full commitment. The instant their power surged, Zeke's expression sharpened. He stepped forward. His movements flowed seamlessly, minimal, efficient, exact. He intercepted spear, sword, and shield in quick succession, redirecting force with such ease that their combined assault dissolved almost immediately. The exchange ended before it properly began. Zeke lowered his arms and evaluated them calmly. Langus's spear technique possessed strength, but he forced his momentum, breaking the natural rhythm of the art. Selena's speed and strike volume were commendable, yet her attacks lacked grounding. They carried motion without weight. Raymond's shield work, however, was steady, stable, and gradually improving. A faint smile touched Zeke's lips. All 3, he said, remained too passive. Hesitation had no place in genuine combat. If they intended to improve, they needed to attack without restraint. From behind them, Leica muttered that the entire situation was absurd. Zeke glanced over his shoulder and asked if she truly believed that. She replied sharply, "Allowing oneself to be struck without circulating source power was reckless, bordering on madness. Even as she spoke, Zeke continued weaving through renewed attacks, slipping past spear thrusts and blade arcs with casual precision. To him, this was proper training. He lifted his arm slightly and remarked that his physical body alone had grown durable enough to endure their blows, even without reinforcing himself with source power. Did she honestly not see that? Leica exhaled heavily, pressing a hand to her forehead. At the very least, she said, he should stop talking while they were actively trying to hit him. Langus, still striking, muttered that Zeke was completely insane. Leica shook her head. In her view, they were just as strange for continuing to attack him as though their efforts weren't being rendered meaningless. Raymond, bracing behind his shield, questioned how Zeke's defense could be so overwhelming without any visible energy reinforcement. Selena added that what they were witnessing exceeded the limits of what a human body should withstand. Leica cut them off flatly. Zeke should not be compared to humans at all. She reminded them that the upperclassmen had long since given him a title, the demon child of the Eastern Hall. Zeke shot Leica a sideways look, faintly offended. Was that supposed to be an insult? His expression seemed to ask. The sparring did not stop. After deflecting another coordinated strike, Zeke shifted his attention back to her. Had she come only to observe, or was she planning to join them? Leica exhaled, her tone steady. The training itself was fine, but there was something more urgent to address. Her next words caused the others to pause mid-motion. It seemed they would soon be facing students from the other dragon nests. And sooner than anyone had anticipated. Langus stiffened. Raymond admitted quietly that he had always assumed such a day would come eventually. Selena asked if this was connected to the upcoming evaluation. Leica shook her head slightly. She did not know the specifics, but the signs were obvious. The instructor's altered demeanor, unusual movements within the halls, subtle shifts in routine. All of it pointed toward an imminent confrontation. Zeke considered this. He realized he had never paid attention to such nuances. His focus had always been elsewhere. Leica's expression grew serious. She warned him in particular to be cautious. The Western Hall possessed another contender for the position of future family head, someone truly formidable. Zeke's smile deepened. At last, something interesting. Several days later, the Eastern Hall training grounds were filled to capacity. Juniors stood tense beneath a heavy atmosphere. Seniors maintained composed expressions, their mere presence enough to pressure the weaker students into silence. Zeke and his group remained together, watching quietly. He noted that every student had been summoned into the arena without distinction of rank. Leica gave a small nod. This was exactly what she had predicted. Without warning, the gates opened. Conversation died instantly. Ephria entered. Her presence alone commanded silence. She announced that in 3 days' time, the students of the Eastern Hall would face those of the other dragon nests. Shock rippled through the crowd. Anxiety spread rapidly among the juniors. Raymond frowned. Selena's expression hardened. Langus's posture tightened. Zeke, however, smiled. It had been some time since he had felt genuine anticipation. Ephria raised 3 fingers. In exactly 3 days, every student present would stand against representatives from the other nests. Traditionally, such inter-nest battles were reserved for graduation, after years of evaluation and refinement. To declare one so abruptly left many struggling to understand. Ephria allowed the murmurs to settle before continuing. There was a reason for the decision, she said, though she could not disclose it. What she could promise was this: those who proved victorious would be entrusted with a special mission. Zeke's eyes flickered. He did not need further explanation. Anything labeled special within the academy meant risk, conflict, and growth. To him, it sounded far too valuable to ignore. Ephria outlined the structure. The event would follow an elimination format. Each of the 4 dragon nests would send 7 representatives. The Eastern Hall would choose its 7 that very day. A senior stepped forward confidently and asked whether the representatives would naturally be selected from among the upper ranks. Ephria's response was calm but pointed. If that were the case, why summon every student regardless of year? The implication was unmistakable. Selection would be open to all. A ripple of unrest passed through the seniors. Several scoffed openly, questioning what juniors could possibly contribute to a confrontation of this magnitude. Their dismissive stares bore down on the younger students. Before stepping away, Ephria made one final point clear. She did not care how it was decided. The 7 representatives must be chosen today. With that, she departed. Silence lingered only briefly. Then a senior advanced with assured steps. Rick, one of the Eastern Nest's strongest upperclassmen. He turned toward the juniors, voice edged with authority. The 7 representatives, he declared, would naturally be drawn from the seniors. Sweeping his gaze arrogantly across the crowd, he asked if anyone disagreed. For a moment, no one moved. Then a single figure stepped forward from the junior ranks. Leica. Her voice was calm. Yes, she had an objection. There was no reason the 7 positions should belong exclusively exclusively to seniors. Juniors, herself included, were fully capable of competing. Rick's jaw tightened. He muttered her name under his breath. Rick steadied himself and smoothed the irritation from his face. In a measured tone, he replied that Lady Laika seemed to be misunderstanding the issue. This was not about lineage or prestige, he said, but about combat ability. In direct confrontation, experience and raw strength determined victory, nothing else. He did not get to finish. Laika released her mana. The atmosphere shifted instantly. 3 radiant stars ignited upon her chest, gleaming with unmistakable clarity. Calmly, she asked whether someone bearing 3 stars still lacked the qualifications to compete. The seniors stared. Rick's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. A murmur passed through the upper ranks. When had a junior reached 3 stars? Laika continued evenly. She agreed that strength should decide the representatives, but she posed a simple question. Were there truly 7 seniors stronger than her? Silence lingered. If not, she reasoned, then selection could not logically exclude juniors. Rick clenched his jaw. Laika was an exception. He snapped. A rare case. Raising his voice, he insisted that no other junior could possibly surpass the seniors. A lazy voice interrupted. Rick was being unnecessarily loud. Rick turned sharply, irritation flaring. What did you say? Zeke stood a short distance away, expression relaxed. I said, he repeated calmly, there's no need to shout. His gaze swept across the seniors. It was obvious, he remarked lightly, that they believed every junior beneath them was weak. As he spoke, his aura unfurled, not violently, but with a suffocating density that rolled outward across the field like an invisible tide. The pressure alone forced several nearby students to stiffen. A faint smile curved his lips. Instead of arguing, he suggested something simpler. Fight. From this moment on, anyone who wished to compete could battle freely. When only 7 remained standing, those 7 would represent the eastern nest. Laika pinched the bridge of her nose. This was escalating far too quickly. She understood better than anyone how dangerous an uncontrolled clash between ranks could become. Forcing herself to step forward, she spoke before chaos erupted. A ranking tournament, she proposed, open to all who wished to participate. Over the next 3 days, results would be recorded and standings determined objectively. The top 7 would earn their place. Rick hesitated. Publicly retreating was not an option, and no better alternative presented itself. With visible reluctance, he agreed, dismissing it as a pointless formality. In his mind, the outcome was already decided. Laika turned to Zeke. Was he planning to enter as well? His eyes brightened immediately. Of course, he answered without hesitation. Then he glanced toward Langus, Selena, and Raymond. They would participate too. Langus stiffened. Did he truly mean they would face senior students head-on? Zeke confirmed it without the slightest doubt. He reminded them of the relentless training they had endured together, the limits they had shattered repeatedly. If they did not demonstrate the results now, then when? Selena exhaled quietly. The pressure was immense, but retreating would only validate the seniors' contempt. Raymond nodded firmly. If this was happening, he would give everything he had. No excuses. Without further discussion, the 3 stepped beside Zeke, forming their familiar formation. Laika surveyed the remaining juniors. Did anyone else wish to join? The response was uncertain. Whispers spread among them. Even if Laika and Zeke possessed confidence, their opponents were seniors, many already bearing 3 stars. To most of the younger students, victory felt unrealistic. Zeke listened. Then he muttered almost to himself that he could not understand why they were already defeated in spirit. There was far more to gain from facing someone stronger than from avoiding them altogether. Even loss had its worth. Defeat offered experience, sharpened awareness, and forced growth, lessons that could never be learned by remaining comfortable. After a short silence, Zeke concluded that hesitation no longer mattered. The moment had already arrived. He, Laika, and the juniors who had stepped forward now stood prepared. Zeke's gaze drifted toward the seniors, a faint, assured smile forming on his lips. At last, he would see what the upper ranks were truly capable of. Across the field, Rick's patience snapped. He barked at his fellow seniors, calling the juniors an irritation that had overstepped their place. No matter how boldly they acted, he sneered. There was no world in which first years could triumph over seasoned 3-star students. The gap in experience alone made the outcome obvious. Several seniors laughed openly. One remarked that there was no need to exert themselves. Best not to injure the juniors too badly. Another pointed out mockingly that, aside from Lady Laika, every junior present was merely a 1-star warrior. The tension among Zeke's teammates tightened. Noticing it immediately, Zeke asked calmly what troubled them. Langus answered honestly. Their opponents were seniors, many at 3 stars. Anyone would feel pressure facing such a disparity. Zeke's reply came without delay. They had trained relentlessly. They had crossed limits together again and again. During practice, they had already proven their ability. More importantly, they needed to trust themselves. His steady tone carried conviction. Selena's rigid posture softened into a small smile. Langus exhaled quietly, the knot in his chest easing. The unease that had clung to them began to dissolve, replaced with renewed resolve. Rick's voice cut across the field again. Enough talking. He ordered the juniors to release their auras and stop wasting time. They did not have all day for idle speeches. If Zeke was so confident, he should step forward immediately. The confrontation began. From the sidelines, the remaining juniors watched in stunned silence. They could hardly follow what unfolded. One after another, seniors were brought down. Langus stood over his fallen opponent, spear steady. Selena lowered her blade after securing victory. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, spreading like wildfire. Had this year's seniors grown weak, or were the juniors something far beyond ordinary? Standing apart, Zeke observed with open satisfaction. He praised them sincerely. Langus's deflection had improved markedly, his sense for detecting openings sharper than before. Selena had refined the layered transitions of the Windflower sword, her movements far more cohesive. Raymond's strategic awareness had deepened. He now adjusted his shield with deliberate calculation, using positioning and deception to control the flow of battle. Zeke felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. Their effort had borne fruit. He hoped they would carry this confidence beyond training grounds and into real confrontations. Laika, too, demonstrated her capability. When her turn came, she ended the match decisively, her lightning surging forward in a single overwhelming burst that left her senior opponent defeated in an instant. The outcome left the remaining seniors stunned. They could not reconcile what they had just witnessed. Second-year juniors, only 2-star, had dismantled them so decisively. Laika stood over her defeated opponent, lightning still faintly crackling along her arm. Her voice cut across the field. Is this still not enough? Rick's shout answered her. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. 3-star seniors did not lose to 2-star juniors. They simply did not. Yet the moment Zeke stepped into view, Rick's voice wavered despite his anger. Even after watching his peers fall, he forced out a scornful laugh and declared the results meaningless. A fluke, nothing more. Zeke did not argue loudly. He released his mana. The pressure rolled outward, heavy and controlled, pressing against the air like an unseen tide. Conversation ceased. Even those uninjured felt their breathing grow shallow. His gaze settled on Rick. Rick, he observed calmly, seemed obsessed with age, rank, and the number of stars, as if those labels were absolute truths. In reality, they were merely references, indicators, useful perhaps, but irrelevant when blades crossed. True strength, Zeke continued, was determined by a single outcome. Victory. The weak lost, the strong won. Nothing else mattered. Rick's face flushed red. He barked that Zeke was ignorant. Stars directly reflected power. Did he truly not understand something so basic? Zeke smiled faintly. He asked one simple question. Regardless of how many stars someone possessed, if their heart were crushed, would they live? Rick froze. Zeke's tone remained even. Combat was not measured by titles, seniority, or glowing emblems. It was decided by the result. Could you win? Rick's panic twisted into fury. He accused Zeke of spouting nonsense. He was a senior. He had only shown restraint because Zeke was younger. But now there would be no mercy. Zeke looked almost bored. Finish talking, he asked. Children, he remarked lightly, should use their bodies instead of their mouths. Then he simplified the matter. It was just the two of them. What martial art had Rick trained? Let him show it. Let him prove the depth of his effort. Rick roared. He leapt high, mana erupting violently around him. The aura of his 3 stars blazed as he descended, pouring every ounce of pride and discipline into a single crushing strike. Zeke moved. One step, one punch. His fist met Rick's mouth mid-descendant. The impact was absolute. Rick's body spun sideways and slammed into the ground with brutal force, dust exploding outward. The flare of his aura shattered like glass. In that instant, his confidence, authority, and pride collapsed with him. Zeke stood over the fallen senior, smiling brightly. You trained well, he said lightly. Laika stared, disbelief slipping into her voice. Rick had been defeated before he could even display the fruits of his training. The surrounding juniors silently agreed. Far from the Eastern Hall within the training grounds of the Western Dragon Nest, a different scene unfolded. The field was strewn with bodies. Dozens of students lay scattered, some groaning, others unconscious. Weapons were dropped where they had fallen. Pride lingered heavier than the dust. At the center sat a single figure. He rested casually atop a defeated opponent's back, one hand loosely holding a dagger still shimmering faintly with mana. Venel, a member of the Fafnir branch of the Lagim family, one of the candidates for future head. His gaze swept over the field with thinly veiled boredom. None of them, he muttered, were worth the effort. Footsteps approached. His subordinates reported that their side of the selection process had concluded. Behind them stood the chosen representatives for the Western Dragon Nest. Among them, Retin, the same student from the entrance examination. Vanille's eyes shifted toward him. He clicked his tongue softly, dismissing him as inexperienced. Then he paused. He felt it. 3 stars. At the realization, Retin stiffened and quickly bowed his head. addressing Venal respectfully as head. Venal regarded Retin with mild interest. He remarked that he had a preference for capable people. If Retin proved himself useful, he added casually, he might consider accepting him as a subordinate. Retin bowed without hesitation. Venal did not even rise to acknowledge the gesture. He remained seated atop the defeated student beneath him, dagger still loosely balanced in his hand. Inside, however, Retin's pulse thundered. A figure of such overwhelming strength had recognized him. As long as Venal stood with the West Dragon Nest, defeat was unthinkable. The special mission would fall into their hands. There was no doubt. Retin was convinced that Venal would ascend as the next head of the Lagan family, and if that future came to pass, being counted among Venal's direct followers would elevate him far above the rest. The thought drew a faint, calculating smile to his lips. A subordinate approached again, this time with visible caution. "There is something you should know," she said quietly. Venal's tone remained indifferent. "Speak." She leaned close and informed him in a low voice that Lady Laika would be part of the Eastern Nest's selected team. Venal's expression hardened. He clicked his tongue and brushed a hand through his hair, irritation flashing across his features. "That will be troublesome," he muttered. At last he rose to his feet, yet his confidence did not waver. It did not matter how gifted she was, he declared. The outcome had already been decided. The West Dragon Nest would claim victory, complete the special assignment, and demonstrate their superiority beyond dispute. His eyes sharpened. He would show every sibling exactly what he was worth. The seat of the next Lagan family head, he vowed silently, would be his. The day of the tournament arrived. The vast arena thrummed with tension. Representatives from all 4 dragon nests sat in their designated sections while the surrounding stands buzzed with restless energy. Students exchanged hushed speculation and wary glances. Excitement mingled with pressure, thick in the air. Langus scanned the crowd, shoulders tightening. There were far more spectators than he had anticipated. Laika followed his gaze calmly. Of course there were. Students from every nest had gathered to witness the event. Then her eyes narrowed slightly. Many familiar faces were absent, those who had failed during the selection trials. "Doesn't it feel smaller than it should?" she asked quietly. Understanding struck Langus like a blow. The eliminated were not merely absent. They were no longer acknowledged, discarded, branded as false dragons. Just like his father, his breathing grew uneven. His hands trembled at his sides. Laika noticed immediately. Without drawing attention, she reached over and gave his back a firm tap. No matter who had fallen away, she reminded him, they were here. They had grown strong enough to be chosen as representatives of the Eastern Dragon Nest. That alone proved their value. Langus swallowed and steadied himself. When the battles began, he said firmly he would give everything he had. Behind them, Zeke stood in silence, eyes moving steadily across the arena. Laika turned toward him and smiled faintly. For a tournament of this scale, his calm was almost unsettling. Zeke replied that there was nothing remarkable about it. He was simply observing the other representatives, measuring posture, aura control, breathing patterns, estimating their combat ability. Langus promptly dropped to the ground in exaggerated disbelief. Laika crouched beside him, muttering that this was exactly what she had expected. Only Zeke would treat a selection tournament like a battlefield reconnaissance. While Zeke's attention moved steadily across the arena, 2 figures approached from the Eastern Nests section. Aaron and Rick both had secured places among the 7 representatives. Zeke regarded them quietly. They were not the same as before. Rick met his gaze without hostility this time. He admitted openly that his earlier defeat had forced him to confront his own arrogance. Since that day, he had trained with sincerity, abandoning the shield of seniority and status. As a descendant of the Lagan bloodline, he said, he valued strength above all, and in his eyes, the strongest among the younger generation were Laika and Zeke. Zeke considered him briefly before replying in his usual even tone. Strength itself was not a flaw, but it demanded responsibility. As long as Rick understood that, there was nothing more to say. With that, Zeke's focus returned to the competitors gathered from the other nests. Aside from the Eastern representatives, every participant present was confirmed to be a 3-star combatant, yet something was conspicuously absent: no 4-star warriors. Even so, 3 individuals stood out to him. Their aura control, posture, and presence placed them dangerously close to the next threshold, on the verge of 4 stars. A faint smile touched Zeke's lips. This tournament might prove worthwhile after all. Nearby, Laika was still speaking with Langus and the others when arms suddenly draped over her shoulders from behind. She startled mid-sentence. The girl leaning against her grinned lazily, her tone teasing and familiar. It had been a while, she said. Had Laika been doing well, no one giving her trouble, she hoped. Laika recovered quickly, assuring her that everything was fine. Langus, watching cautiously, asked who the newcomer was. Laika hesitated a fraction before answering. Her cousin. She introduced her formally, Sandy Typhon, daughter of the head of the Typhona family. The name alone caused Langus, Selena, and Raymond to stiffen. The Typhona lineage was one of the 4 great branch families under the Lagan banner. Sandy tilted her head, openly examining the group. "And these children?" she asked lightly. Leica smiled without hesitation. They were her classmates, her friends. Sandy's brow lifted at that word. Friendship was harmless enough, she remarked. But were they truly appropriate companions for someone destined to become a future family head? Her gaze sharpened slightly. Weren't they too weak to stand at Leica's side? The air tightened. Langus and the others felt the sting immediately, discomfort and embarrassment flashing across their faces. Before Leica could respond, Zeke stepped forward. In a calm voice, he suggested that Sandy would understand soon enough, once she had the chance to fight alongside them. Sandy's eyes shifted to him, mildly intrigued. "And you are?" Leica introduced him simply. Zeke, also a candidate for the future head position. Recognition flickered across Sandy's expression. "So you're the rumored illegitimate child to still be alive." Zeke did not react outwardly. A small, unreadable smile formed instead. Leica's expression hardened. She demanded to know why Sandy felt the need to speak that way. Sandy shrugged lightly. Regardless of status, Zeke remained Leica's rival, and in her view, surrounding herself with companions, whatever they were, would only weaken her standing against the other candidates. Her implication was clear. A future head had no room for burdens. Sandy did not stop there. She swept her gaze over Langus and the others, pointing out coldly that not one of them had even reached 3 stars. Had the standards of the Eastern Dragon Nest fallen so low? She wondered aloud. Zeke answered without raising his voice. If she continued to look down on them, he said evenly, she might soon find herself surprised. Her reaction was immediate. Sandy turned fully toward him, eyes narrowing. She demanded to know what he had just implied. In a frigid tone, she reminded him of his position, an illegitimate child with no supporting branch, no faction behind him. The only thing he possessed, she claimed, was the blood of the family head, nothing more. She stepped closer, invading his space. With a sharp gesture, she pointed at him and asked whether he truly believed he could speak so casually in front of her. Zeke did not retreat. "It was only advice," he replied calmly. That composure irritated her further. Mana began to stir around her frame, tension rising like a storm about to break. And then someone stepped between them. The sudden interruption halted her aura. The newcomer positioned himself squarely between Sandy and Zeke, posture relaxed but firm. It was Edges Van Blade, the representative of the North Dragon Nest. In an even tone, he reminded Sandy that this was not the place to provoke members of another team. The tournament had yet to begin. Edges cast a brief glance at Zeke. Despite standing between 2 prominent figures, Zeke's expression remained unchanged, as though none of it concerned him. Sandy clicked her tongue, telling Edges to move aside. She was handling something important. Edges smiled lightly. He could not overlook it. Not with the selection tournament about to commence. Around them, the arena buzzed with whispers and speculation. Then a single commanding voice cut through the noise. Silence fell instantly. Every head turned. The man who stepped forward needed no introduction. Teach Mensch, captain of the Gold Dragon Corps, an instructor whose reputation for severity was known throughout the academy. He raised his voice, announcing that the long-awaited selection tournament would now begin. A slight smile touched Zeke's lips. Mensch explained the structure clearly. All 4 dragon halls would compete in a tournament-style elimination format. The halls would first be divided into 2 brackets. The victors of each bracket would advance to the final round. All matches would be one-on-one duels. Each hall would send out fighters in a predetermined sequence decided beforehand. From the 7 representatives of each hall, the side that secured 4 victories first would claim the match. Final standings would determine first and second place accordingly. He emphasized a critical rule. Once the battles began, the fighting order could not be altered. The arrangement itself was part of each hall's strategy. Then came the final announcement. Those chosen through this tournament would be assigned to a special mission. At the mention of a mission, Zeke's smile deepened almost imperceptibly. Combat was one thing, but missions, that was where true stakes lay. Mensch continued, stating that this assignment held immense importance for the Lagan family. Participation would count as a significant contribution to the house. Leica's expression hardened with resolve. Across the arena, Vino's lips curved in quiet confidence. They both understood. To contribute through such a mission was to step closer to the position of family head. Mensch then ordered the bracket selection to begin. Representatives from each hall would step forward and draw a stone from a sealed box to determine matchups. When the West Hall was called, Vino Fafnir advanced without hesitation. He reached into the box, withdrew a stone, and examined it briefly before Mensch nodded for him to return to his place. Seeing him up close, Leica stiffened slightly. Vino glanced toward her. A thin, unsettling smile formed at the corner of his mouth. Zeke noticed. Quietly, he asked whether she knew him. Leica answered under her breath. He was the West Hall representative she had mentioned before. Vanille Fafnold, one of the foremost candidates to inherit the Lagan family name. At the mention of him, Zeke's lips curved slightly. As his gaze moved across the West Hall's formation, he understood something immediately. It wasn't only Vanille who posed a threat. The entire lineup was formidable. The other halls were disciplined and well prepared, but the West carried a distinct weight. The disparity in presence was tangible. Even without releasing their auras, the West Hall's strength pressed subtly against the arena. Then Zeke's eyes settled on a familiar figure standing among them, Retin. It had been some time. Zeke recalled the entrance examination clearly. Even then, Retin's control and composure had stood out. Now, having reached 3 stars at such an age, it was obvious he had trained relentlessly. Zeke respected that. Across the arena, Retin also noticed him, though his attention shifted quickly. Langus. Retin's jaw tightened. He could not understand why Langus was here. Among the seated students, several of Retin's supporters scoffed openly, whispering loud enough to carry a dropout making it this far? Ridiculous. Langus felt the words like thorns. Raymond leaned closer and asked quietly if he was all right. "I'm fine," Langus answered, though his shoulders had stiffened. More than the whispers, he felt Retin's gaze. It was heavy, deliberate. Mensch's voice cut through the tension once more, calling forward the North Hall representative. Edges Van Blade stepped up calmly and drew his stone. Next came the South Hall. A girl with violet hair walked forward with confident strides, selected her stone, and returned to her group. Finally, the East Hall representative. Leica turned immediately toward Zeke. "You're going." Zeke blinked. "Why me?" "It's obvious," she replied. "You're the strongest." He attempted to protest lightly, suggesting that in tournaments like this, others usually took the spotlight. Leica stared at him as though he had said something absurd. "We're the same age," she reminded him flatly. "Stop thinking so much and go." Before he could respond further, Sandy's voice rang out. "Why is that illegitimate child stepping forward instead of me?" Leica answered without hesitation. "Because he's the strongest member of the East Hall." Sandy rejected the statement instantly. Zeke was not even a 3-star. This tournament, she insisted, was meant to showcase the rivalry between head candidates, Venel and Leica. Leica cut her off. The East Hall was perfectly capable as it stood. A faint smile touched her lips. Quiet, unwavering confidence. Zeke stepped forward at last and drew his stone. When all 4 representatives had chosen, Mensch instructed them to channel their source power into the stones. One by one, they complied. The stones began to glow, the brackets formed. Mensch announced the matchups clearly. First battle, East Hall versus North Hall. Second battle, West Hall versus South Hall. Across the arena, the North Hall prepared. Sandy stood at the front, aura already simmering. Beside her loomed a massive, broad-shouldered student whose mere presence radiated pressure. Langus stared. "That's a student?" he asked under his breath. Leica confirmed it, though even she looked slightly unsettled. She had not expected to face her cousin in the opening match. Sandy, however, seemed pleased. She released her aura openly, letting it surge around her like a challenge thrown before the entire arena. This was perfect. A chance to force Leica to remember her duty, her place. Her voice carried clearly as she declared that she would crush Leica completely. Only then would Leica remember what she was meant to become. In response, Leica's own aura rose. It was not explosive, but it was steady and razor-sharp. Her eyes locked forward. There was no hesitation in them as she prepared for battle. Edges cast Zeke a sidelong glance, interest flickering in his eyes. He admitted that he was sincerely anticipating their eventual clash. Zeke answered with an easy smile. If that was the case, he said, they would likely get along well. He too was looking forward to it. They stood side by side for a brief moment, identical stones glowing faintly in their palms. Zeke's smile deepened. At last, something worth his attention. Elsewhere in the stands, Vanille watched with detached composure, posture relaxed as though the outcome of the early rounds did not concern him. Not far away, the South Hall's violet-haired representative and her teammates observed just as carefully, their silence deliberate as they studied every movement on the field. Then the announcement rang out. The opening match of the selection tournament. East Hall versus North Hall. Both sides straightened at once. Preparations began. Rick's hands tightened into fists. His jaw was set as he muttered under his breath that he had to win, no matter the cost. Leica noticed his rigid posture and turned quietly to Zeke. Rick looked far too tense. Would he be all right? Zeke gave a small nod, acknowledging her concern but offering no reassurance. Instructor Mensch lifted his hand, signaling the first duelists forward. The arena grew still. Rick stepped onto the field, facing the North Hall's chosen fighter. Across from him stood a warrior no less determined. Mensch's hand dropped. The match began. Rick roared as he surged forward, mana gathering densely around his fist. Determination burned in his eyes as he launched his attack. Zeke watched without visible emotion. "Now we'll see," he murmured. Leica folded her arms, gaze fixed on the clash below. From Rick's condition alone, the fight would not be easy. Did Zeke think the same? "In battle, nothing is guaranteed," he replied evenly. His expression shifted faintly as he added, almost offhandedly, that such uncertainty did not apply to him. When he fought, the outcome was absolute. Leica shot him an exasperated look. She had not been talking about him. Unbothered, Zeke continued his analysis. In terms of technique and raw ability, the North Hall fighter was not far ahead of Rick. If Rick performed as he normally did, victory should have been within reach. Leica shook her head. This was different. It was their first time fighting before such a massive crowd. On top of that, Rick carried the weight of representing the entire East Hall. That kind of pressure could distort anyone's movements. Zeke conceded the point. But the same burden rested on the opponent as well. His gaze shifted toward the North Hall's lineup, except for two, Sandy, Edges. Leica felt it too. Their presence was distinct, heavier than the others. Zeke explained quietly that both of them stood at the brink of 4-star level. Fighters that close to the next threshold would not falter simply because of spectators. Inwardly, he noted something else. Sandy, being Leica's cousin, wielded techniques rooted in the same bloodline. When the time came, that confrontation would become more than a match. It would be a lesson. A sharp impact echoed across the arena. Rick's body struck the ground. Silence fell for a split second before the result was declared. North Hall, victorious. Rick lay on the arena floor, defeated. Ren stiffened beside Leica, panic flashing across her face. She whispered that she had to win the second match. Leica spoke softly, urging her not to let nerves consume her. But when the second duel concluded, the outcome repeated itself. North Hall claimed another victory. Rick and Ren returned, heads lowered, offering quiet apologies to Zeke. He only smiled. They had not lacked ability, he told them. They had simply been overwhelmed by the arena's intensity. After a brief pause, they both nodded. They knew he was right. Zeke told Rick and Ren not to linger on their defeat. If this had been a true battlefield, where a single mistake meant death, the result might have unfolded very differently, he said. This arena was not a killing field. It was a training ground. Here, warriors measured skill against skill. Here, failure carried lessons instead of graves. Losses like today's would become strength someday. They simply had to keep training. Rick straightened at those words. Ren's eyes steadied as well. Both answered with renewed resolve. Zeke gave a small nod, then added that the situation had grown serious. 2 consecutive losses meant the next bout carried enormous weight. His gaze shifted. Langus. Zeke turned to him with a bright, almost teasing smile. Langus immediately paled. He begged Zeke not to add pressure, confessing that he had been anxious since morning. Worse still, his opponent was that terrifying senior from the other hall. The thought of facing him in front of the entire academy made his voice tremble. Overwhelmed, Langus clutched at Zeke's sleeve in despair. Zeke reminded him calmly that they had already crossed paths when the teams were first assembled. Langus shook his head rapidly. There had been no one that frightening back then. This was different. The man looked monstrous. Zeke exhaled softly. Encouragement alone would not work. He chuckled and rested a hand on Langus's shoulder, guiding his gaze toward the waiting opponent. Look carefully, Zeke said. Langus stared ahead, confused. Zeke directed his attention lower to the weapon in the man's grip. What is he holding? A sword. Langus answered uncertainly. Exactly. Zeke broke it down simply. The opponent was merely a person holding a sword, nothing more. If the blade thrust forward, evade. If it rose to cut, step back. If it descended to strike, move in. Respond the same way he always had when facing a sword. Nothing else mattered. Langus listened. Slowly, the tremor left his shoulders. His breathing steadied. He nodded. He would react as he always did. Zeke watched the change with quiet satisfaction. Langus's greatest strength was his focus. He only needed direction to sharpen it. Once he learned to center himself naturally, his growth would be remarkable. Nearby, several students snickered, mocking Langus's smaller frame. Someone muttered that he would never reach ranker level. Langus shot them a glare so cold it silenced them instantly. At that moment, Instructor Mensch signaled the beginning of the third match. All eyes returned to the arena. The instant it began, Langus's opponent surged forward, activating the three-blade sword technique. A swift slash carved through the air. Langus sidestepped cleanly. The blade cut nothing but wind. Irritated, the North Hall fighter barked insults and attacked again, intensifying his assault with another execution of the technique. Langus met the strike without panic, deflecting it with steady precision. Leica's hands tightened at her sides. The opponent was pressing inward, into the exact distance where Langus excelled. His friends exchanged uneasy glances. Zeke remained composed. Watch his eyes, he said quietly. Langus's gaze had changed. A faint blue glow shimmered within it. His opponent attacked relentlessly, but every swing was read and avoided with flawless timing. Frustration twisted the swordsman's face as he escalated, unleashing the three-blade chaos. Three-leaf dance. The flurry descended like a storm. Langus's eyes flared brighter. He activated the cloud and water spear technique. Passing clouds. Flowing water. With fluid precision, he intercepted the chaos, dissolving the momentum of the assault. The swordsman faltered, stunned by the seamless defense. Langus did not hesitate. He invoked the technique again, this time transitioning into flood drilling. His polearm surged forward with crushing force. The strike landed squarely against the opponent's chest. The impact was decisive. The swordsman collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. Instructor Mensch stepped forward at once, announcing the end of the match and declaring victory for the East Hall. Langus stood frozen for a moment. Then he exhaled deeply, a fragile but genuine smile spreading across his face. Zeke stood beside Langus, unable to conceal the quiet satisfaction in his eyes. At last he said calmly, "This is where it begins to change." He could feel it. The flow of the match had shifted. Langus's victory had steadied the East Hall. What had begun as a downward spiral was now reversing. Selena stepped into the fourth round and secured a clean, decisive win. Not long after, Raymond followed suit, overwhelming his opponent and leaving the North Hall visibly shaken. The score evened, then tipped. Only one more triumph was needed for the East Hall to claim complete victory. That final confrontation had been unavoidable from the start. Laika advanced into the arena. Across from her stood Sandy Typhona. For a brief moment, the noise of the crowd seemed to dull. The two cousins faced one another in silence before Laika spoke, her tone composed. It had been a long time since they had crossed blades. For the North Hall, the situation had become critical. They now required 2 consecutive wins to overturn the outcome. This duel would determine everything. 2 heirs of the same bloodline, 2 practitioners of the Thunder technique. Sandy studied Laika carefully. She admitted she had not expected North Hall's elite to fall, especially not to fighters who had only just stepped into the 3-star realm. Laika replied evenly that she had warned her before. The East Hall was not weak. Sandy inclined her head slightly, acknowledging her miscalculation regarding Laika's teammates. But she dismissed it just as quickly. It did not matter. Without warning, lightning mana erupted around Sandy's body, crackling violently and distorting the air. Her voice sharpened. The true issue had never been Laika's companions. To become head of the Lagan family required overwhelming individual might, power that could stand alone. And as things stood, Laika could not defeat her. Sandy pressed further. Despite all the talk, Laika was merely the second representative of the East Hall. Did she truly understand how dangerous that was? Did she understand what this position meant? Laika's eyes flickered briefly toward Zeke before returning to her cousin. She answered without hesitation. She understood completely. She had never abandoned her ambition to become head of the family. And even if her opponent was Sandy, her own cousin, she believed she could win. Laika raised her sword and leveled its tip directly at Sandy. "This time will be different." Sandy's gaze narrowed. "If that's true," she murmured, "prove it." In the next heartbeat, she vanished. Gasps rippled through the arena. A flash of lightning split the air. Sandy reappeared behind Laika, thunder mana bursting outward as her blade carved down in a violent arc. If Laika truly believed she was capable, then she would demonstrate it through strength. Laika reacted instantly. Steel met steel. The collision detonated with explosive force, lightning surging outward and tearing across the arena floor. The impact drove Laika's feet into the ground, carving shallow trenches beneath her boots. But she did not yield. Sandy moved again. Another strike, faster, heavier. Her eyes widened slightly. Laika was no longer where she had expected her to be. From the sidelines, Edge's Van Blade observed the exchange with measured focus. As anticipated, Sandy maintained the upper hand. She had mastered the Great Thundersword technique to a far greater extent than Laika. The question was simple. How long could Laika endure? Sandy answered in her own way. Lightning gathered fiercely along her blade, condensing into a piercing current as she invoked Beast Thundersword, Needle Thunder. The thrust shot forward with terrifying precision. So swift it nearly vanished from sight. Laika was a fraction too slow. The piercing thrust slipped past her guard. A streak of red scattered through the air as the force tore across her side and hurled her backward. She struck the arena floor hard. From the East Hall section, Selena and Ren gasped. Laika lay still for only a breath. "It's shallow," she told herself. "Not deep. Don't panic." Her teeth clenched as she forced her breathing to slow. Fear would only cloud her movements. She had to stand. Nearby, Langus muttered that this was too dangerous, that Sandy was overwhelming her. Raymond answered quietly that Laika had grown up under that same pressure. Since childhood, she had trained beside Sandy. This was not the first time she had faced such crushing strength. Laika pushed herself upright. For a fleeting moment, there was something familiar in her posture. The stubborn child who refused to yield. She advanced again, weaving through Sandy's attacks with minimal motion, conserving every ounce of energy. Sandy clicked her tongue. Laika still had that flaw. Whenever her emotions flared, her sword control wavered. Lightning flared around Laika's body as she activated Thunderflesh, reinforcing muscle and bone. The air vibrated with crackling energy. Sandy answered immediately with scattered thunder. The techniques collided. A violent explosion of lightning ripped outward, fracturing stone and gouging the arena floor. Dust and debris spiraled into the air as thunder rolled across the stadium. Laika staggered under the impact. Sandy stood over her, gaze cold. Just as expected, that useless habit had never disappeared. Laika could not even claim dominance within her own hall. If she had chosen the North Hall instead, Sandy added, none of this disgrace would have happened. Laika's breathing was rough, but she forced herself upright again. I can still win. Sandy's eyes hardened. Lose. Her voice was absolute. Laika would never surpass her like this. If the outcome had always been inevitable, Sandy continued, she should have gone directly to their father from the beginning, even if force had been required to bring Laika into the North Hall. Still, Laika remained standing, unmoved. Sandy exhaled sharply, stubborn to the very end. Fine, then she would teach her properly. In a blink, she vanished. Before Laika could fully react, Sandy reappeared behind her. This ends now. Laika tried to gather her power, but Sandy's lightning-infused kick drove into her abdomen first. The impact folded her body. A blade of lightning followed, carving across her side. She was flung through the air, blood scattering before she slammed into the shattered arena floor. Even that was not enough. Sandy leapt high, lightning roaring wildly around her sword as she prepared another strike. From the sidelines, Selena and Langus stared in horror, their eyes turned instinctively towards Zeke. He remained calm. Another wall is about to break, he said quietly. Langus did not understand. Below, Sandy aimed her blade downward at Laika. Stop resisting. Surrender. She declared the end and unleashed the true force of the Great Thundersword technique. Lightning crashed down. The arena convulsed. Stone ruptured beneath the impact. Thunder swallowed the air, and fragments of debris rained outward. The spectators fell into stunned silence. Many believed it was over. When the glare finally faded, Sandy stood unmoving, looking down at Laika's fallen figure. Then, she stiffened. Slowly, painfully, Laika rose. Her uniform was torn. Blood traced down her arm. Her breathing trembled. But she stood. She met Sandy's gaze and acknowledged it plainly. That truly was the Great Thundersword technique. A faint smile touched her lips. It's impressive. Disbelief flickered across Sandy's face. That attack should have finished her. Laika answered calmly. Years ago, perhaps it would have, but during the past 5 years, she had not remained idle. Moments before the match had begun, Laika had been tense. Zeke noticed immediately she did not look like herself. He asked what was wrong. She hesitated, then admitted the truth. The reason was simple and heavy. Before the match had begun, Laika had finally voiced what weighed on her. Her opponent was not just any rival, it was Sandy, her older sister. At first, Zeke hadn't grasped why that alone would shake her so deeply. But Laika explained. She had learned the foundation of the Great Thundersword technique from their uncle, the current head of the Typhona family. Yet the person who had truly refined her understanding, who had corrected her stance, sharpened her timing, and pushed her limits, was Sandy. Sandy had not merely been family. She had been her teacher, her standard. The wall she had never once climbed over. Laika admitted it plainly. She had never defeated her sister. Not a single time. Yes, she had grown stronger over the past 5 years, but that thought only deepened her doubt. If she had advanced that much, then Sandy, who had always stood ahead, must have progressed even further. Despite her earlier bold words, the truth was different. She was no longer certain she could win. Only then did Zeke fully understand. A faint smile crossed his face as he pointed at himself. Had she already forgotten their training? The endless sparring? The countless times she had been knocked flat? The days she rose only to be struck down again as those memories resurfaced? Being overwhelmed without mercy? Again and again, tears welled in Laika's eyes. Zeke chuckled softly. Did it trouble her that much? He told her she had always possessed one significant weakness. Whenever her emotions flared, her vision narrowed. She stopped perceiving the battlefield as a whole. That was why, for 5 years, her training had centered on composure, on keeping her mind clear even while under pressure. Laika's tears fell more freely. From her perspective, Zeke had shown her no mercy at all. He had attacked without hesitation. Zeke only smiled as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That, too, had been part of the process. Laika snapped back at him, demanding to know what could possibly be admirable about being beaten senseless every day. The results, he replied simply. Now she should be capable of facing her opponent with far greater calm than before. Laika admitted that might be true. Still, she did not know whether it would be enough against Sandy. Zeke told her not to complicate it. Fight. Once the battle began, her instincts would respond. Her talent would surface the moment she saw Sandy's movements directly. She would understand how much she had changed. And more than that, she had received guidance from him, from the strongest. Because of that, she no longer needed to measure herself against past victories or defeats. Laika hesitated. The fear had not vanished. Words alone could not erase it, but she felt steadier. She thanked him quietly. Zeke nodded, satisfied. Then he asked one final question. Had Sandy truly been the one to teach her the Great Thundersword technique? When Laika confirmed it, his smile deepened. That made it ideal. He gestured towards Sandy and told Laika to treat this like training. Observe carefully. absorb every detail of the technique, analyze it. If she did, she would not simply fight her sister, she would surpass her. Back in the present, standing battered yet unbroken, Leica spoke with new certainty. She had been given the opportunity to witness Sandy's great thunder sword technique up close. She had taken it head on, studied each motion, each transition of lightning and steel. Through that, she had begun to see something, just a fragment. Sandy frowned, not understanding. Before she could question further, Leica moved. She lunged forward. Sandy's eyes widened. Something was different. Leica's blade felt unfamiliar. For a fleeting instant, Sandy could not discern whether the strike had slowed, or if time itself had faltered. That brief hesitation was enough. Leica closed the gap. Sandy shouted, but Leica did not pause. Lightning gathered along her sword as she executed the needle of the thunder sword technique. Lightning detonated between them at arm's length. The blast struck Sandy head on, forcing her backward as raw voltage pressed down on her guard. The force distorted the air and drove her boots across the fractured stone. Leica gave her no time to recover. She sprang upward, lightning trailing behind her like a banner, and descended with a second attack. Sandy struggled to stabilize herself. This sudden transformation, made no sense. She demanded to know how Leica's movements had altered so dramatically in an instant. Mid-air, Leica's blade carved a brilliant crescent through the air. Thunder flash sword technique. As she struck, she answered. It was a matter of rhythm. A subtle variation in tempo, something Sandy had always possessed naturally, something Leica had lacked. Until now, she had finally grasped it. All that remained was execution. Sandy snapped back that comprehension alone did not grant mastery. Understanding a principle did not mean it could be replicated immediately, but the clash unfolding before them suggested otherwise. From the East Hall section, Langus and Selena shouted in exhilaration. Selena's eyes shone as she exclaimed that Leica's movements were completely different from before. Zeke observed with quiet satisfaction. Battling someone who wielded the same art, he remarked, could teach lessons that ordinary training never could. Rick, standing nearby, asked whether Zeke truly understood the cause of that abrupt change. Zeke answered calmly. Leica had absorbed her sister's great thundersword technique during the fight itself. This was the result of their training, taking the opponent's technique head-on while maintaining clarity of mind. Rick and Raymond listened without interrupting. In the past, Zeke continued, Leica had always allowed excitement to overtake her. Her perception narrowed until she saw nothing beyond her own blade. There had been no space for adaptation. But the Leica fighting now was different. She was composed enough to observe, even while trading blows. Facing a swordsman who mirrored her own technique had pushed her insight to a higher level. Back in the arena, Sandy steadied her breathing and declared that the battle was far from finished. An improvised adjustment would not be enough to defeat her. Leica lowered her stance, lightning coiling around her body. They collided again. Thunder erupted outward, shockwaves slamming into the arena barrier as arcs of electricity tore across the ground. This time, Sandy was the one driven back. Disbelief flashed across her face. She could not accept that she was being overpowered in sheer force. Leica advanced without hesitation. If the contest came down to physical conditioning, she said she was not inferior. She too had endured brutal training, pushed to the edge of death more than once. She raised her sword. Watch carefully. With a sharp cry, she unleashed her technique. Celestial Thunder Tornado Sword. A spiraling storm of lightning burst forth, twisting violently across the arena. The ground split under the strain as the vortex swallowed Sandy entirely. The thunderstorm raged, then faded. When the light dissipated, Leica remained standing, chest heaving, sword trembling slightly in her grip. Across from her, Sandy swayed. For a brief moment, she managed a faint smile. Her younger sister had grown far stronger. Then her strength gave out. She fell. Silence swept through the arena before the announcement echoed clearly overhead. Victory. East Hall. In the West Hall section, Vanille stared at the battlefield stunned. Beside him, Alan noticed his expression and calmly asked if something was wrong. Venel offered no reply. Leica began walking back toward her team. Zeke spoke first. It was an excellent fight. Though his words carried praise, there was the slightest edge beneath them, an unspoken regret that he had not yet drawn his own blade. Selena hurried forward to support Leica. Up close, the damage was clearer, but Leica smiled faintly. She was glad the outcome had been decided in her round. As Selena steadied her, Leica added that had she fallen, though she had never planned to, Zeke's opponent would have been Edge's Van Blade. Zeke glanced at her. Did she know him personally? Leica shook her head. Not directly, but his name carried weight. Edge's Van Blade was said to be the greatest prodigy the Van Blade family had produced since its founding. Leica's words lingered with Zeke. From what he had seen so far, Edge's truly was different. Even among the tournament's finest, the young swordsman stood a step above the rest. Leica glanced discreetly toward Edge's and admitted that if Zeke were to face him, she could not confidently predict the outcome. Before the moment could stretch further, Menrick stepped into the arena. His voice carried clearly across the stadium as he announced that although East Hall had already secured overall victory, the remaining matches would still be fought to completion. Langus inhaled sharply in surprise. Zeke frowned slightly. What did that mean? Ren voiced the same confusion. According to the rules, once 4 members of one side had fallen, the team battle should have concluded. Zeke found the decision peculiar, but inwardly he understood. There was only one reason to continue. They wanted to witness a particular duel, Zeke versus Edges. Still, the motive did not trouble him. A faint smile touched his lips. As long as he could fight, that was enough. Across the arena, Edge's Van Blade stood prepared, calm yet unmistakably eager. The confrontation everyone anticipated was now unavoidable. Edges spoke first. Though North Hall had already lost, he said he was genuinely pleased that circumstances allowed him to face Zeke. Zeke blinked in mild surprise. Had Edges truly been that intent on crossing blades with him? Edges confirmed it without hesitation. Zeke had been appointed representative of East Hall. Even with Leica present, the position had been given to him instead. That decision alone had stirred Edges' curiosity. He wanted to see for himself who Zeke really was. Edges pointed out what others whispered, that Zeke carried the bloodline of the family head. Yet by outward measure he remained only a 2-star fighter, and despite that he had been chosen over Leica. That contradiction fascinated him. With a bright, unrestrained smile, Edges declared that this mystery was precisely why he wished to test him. Zeke was silent for a brief moment before answering. As expected, he said lightly, they would likely get along well. He too had been waiting for this fight. Edges asked, amused, whether Zeke felt excited. Zeke replied that there were many capable fighters present, but Edges stood apart. A prodigy praised as a once-in-a-century genius of the Van Blade family was not someone one could ignore. It was only natural to want such a battle. Edges slowly lifted his katana. His expression sharpened. He liked Zeke's attitude, he said. With every word, his anticipation only deepened. Zeke's gaze settled on the blade. It had been a long time since he had seen a katana of that caliber. Menrick's voice rang out once more, announcing the start of the 7th match. Edges disappeared. In a single step, he erased the distance between them. For the briefest instant, even Zeke was taken aback. That mobility, he remarked lightly. Impressive. Edge's katana slid free in one seamless motion, thousand-leaf katana style. Bright sheath. Golden lightning burst outward, saturating the arena in radiant light. The blade descended. As it neared, Zeke sensed something peculiar. The presence carried by the strike vanished entirely, as if the attack itself had erased its own intent. The edge hovered less than an inch away. Zeke assessed calmly. He could avoid it. The katana cleaved through his body, or so it appeared. Edges' eyes widened. Zeke stood beside him unharmed, as though he had never occupied the space that had just been cut apart. A feint. Edges realized instantly that he had been misled. At that same moment, Zeke rotated his body smoothly. He had already confirmed that the strike had landed. Just not where Edges believed. A faint smile formed on his lips. That was excellent, Zeke said. Show me more. Edges responded without irritation. Such ability was to be expected, he replied. He stepped forward again, adjusting his footing as he invoked another technique of the thousand-leaf katana style, wavy leaf. The katana began to move, not in rigid arcs, but in fluid currents. Each slash flowed into the next, seamless and unbroken. The blade no longer seemed like steel, but like water given shape. The attack surged forward like a rising tide. Zeke retreated lightly, still smiling. A straight strike could be predicted, but a blade that flowed like water, that was far harder to read. Even so, Zeke did not retreat blindly. As he evaded, he studied. The flowing pattern of Edge's blade began to settle into his perception. Beneath the fluid motion, there was structure, an underlying cadence. The next instant, Zeke sprang upward. The tide-like slash swept beneath him, losing its dominance once it failed to fully track his movement. Suspended in the air, Zeke grinned. Not bad, he said lightly, but I don't plan on getting cut. Edges gave no reply. Lightning gathered once more along the length of his katana. Brilliant billion lightning. The technique burst forth in a storm of flashing arcs. Zeke shifted aside again, though this time his eyes narrowed in focus. The blade's path was extraordinarily difficult to anticipate. It was not merely fast, it disrupted timing itself. Each swing seemed to alter the natural rhythm of combat, arriving half a breath sooner or later than expected. As their exchange intensified, Zeke recognized the truth. Edges was not attacking in fixed sequences. He was continuously transitioning, seamlessly adjusting between forms. Yet even with those changes, neither his speed nor his power faltered. Efficiency. That was the core of the style. No wasted motion, no excess force. Every cut was honed precisely to Zeke's breathing. his stance, his smallest shift in weight. A crisp sound split the air. The katana's edge skimmed across Zeke's clothing, slicing fabric cleanly without touching the skin beneath. Zeke acknowledged it inwardly. Such control could only be forged through brutal, unending discipline. Incredible, he murmured. Edges' breathing remained steady despite the relentless pace. He admitted that he had not expected to struggle to corner Zeke even after pushing himself this far. There was open admiration in his voice as he asked what kind of training could shape someone like him. Zeke's expression brightened. "If you're that curious," he replied, "we can train together once this is over." Without warning, he moved. In a blink, he closed the gap. His fist drew back and then drove forward with explosive force. Edges intercepted the punch with his katana, but the collision sent a violent tremor through his arm. His grip wavered as raw power surged through the blade. A flicker of disbelief crossed his face. That strength did not belong to a mere two-star fighter. Zeke adjusted his footing, replaying the exchange in his mind. He had intentionally altered his breathing patterns, yet Edges had adapted regardless. Internally, he conceded it. Edges was more refined than he had first assumed. Edges caught the remark and responded calmly. "Does that mean you're done observing me?" he asked. "You've started counterattacking." "To a degree," Zeke answered. Edge's eyes sharpened. "So you think you've already read my style?" He did not wait for confirmation. Suddenly, he leapt into the air. His aura intensified as he raised his katana high. "In that case," he declared, "let me show you something more." Zeke recognized the posture. Same setup as before, he noted. He pivoted smoothly, avoiding the descending slash with practiced ease. But Edges did not follow the expected path. In that instant, his blood surged and a residual image split from his form. An afterimage lingered, masking the true course of his strike. Before Zeke could fully process the shift, impact, a sharp force struck his chest. His eyes widened as the katana's edge carved across him. He was driven backward, shoes scraping harshly against the arena floor as he fought to stabilize himself. Edge's expression shifted subtly. "Is that enough?" he asked. "Or should I reveal more?" Zeke lowered his gaze. A thin line marked his chest where the blade had cut him. "So he managed to land one," Zeke murmured. Then he smiled. It was the same calm, familiar smile, but now unmistakably brighter, edged with exhilaration. "This is getting interesting," he said. The atmosphere around the arena tightened. This was no longer a simple exchange of techniques. On the sidelines of the shattered arena, Sandy lay still. She slowly opened her eyes. For a brief moment, confusion clouded her mind. "Where am I?" she murmured faintly. Footsteps rushed toward her. "Sandy!" Her teammates knelt beside her, panic written across their faces. One of them carefully supported her shoulders while another anxiously checked for injuries. "Are you hurt? Can you move?" Sandy blinked, awareness returning in fragments. The clash, the pressure, the final overwhelming strike. Laika. She pushed herself into a seated position and gave a small nod. "I'm fine." Then she lowered her gaze. "I lost, didn't I?" Silence lingered for a second before anyone could answer. She already knew the truth. The memory had come back clearly. The duel between her and Laika had been fierce. Each exchange sharper than the last. Neither had been willing to give an inch. But in the decisive moment, Laika's technique had broken through with flawless precision. Sandy's defenses had collapsed, and the arena floor had risen to meet her. A faint smile curved on her lips. "To lose to family," she said softly. "That's not so bad." Still, she looked toward her teammates with quiet regret. "I'm sorry. If I had won, North Hall might still have had a chance at overall victory." One of her teammates immediately shook his head. "We were defeated first. If anything, we're the ones who should apologize." The others bowed slightly. "We put too much pressure on you." Sandy's expression softened. She shook her head calmly. "No, our opponents were simply stronger today. That's all." She straightened her posture despite the lingering ache in her body. A determined light returned to her eyes. "Next time, we move forward together. No one falls alone again." Her teammates nodded firmly, resolve replacing disappointment. After a moment, Sandy glanced toward the center of the arena. "Has the West Hall versus South Hall match begun?" One of her companions pointed toward the battlefield. "It should have ended already, but for some reason the fight is still going." "Look." Sandy followed the direction of his finger. What she saw made her inhale sharply. The duel was still raging. At the center of the ruined arena stood Edges, his aura blazing around him like a storm given shape. Energy swirled violently at his feet, lifting dust and fragments of stone into the air. "He's using that technique," Sandy whispered. Edges raised his katana, and 5 radiant aura leaves manifested behind him, each one shimmering with compressed power. 5 aura leaves. That was no ordinary technique. It was the pinnacle of the style of the 1,000-bladed katana 5-shaded blade. Why was he pushing himself to that extent? Then her gaze shifted. Opposite him stood Zeke, calm, smiling faintly. As if he were merely sparring, Laika's earlier words resurfaced in Sandy's mind. "He's the strongest in East Hall." Now she understood. Edges moved first. The 5 aura leaves exploded outward, overlapping afterimages of the katana flooding the arena. Blades of light surged forward in a relentless storm, slicing through air with terrifying speed. The spectators gasped, but Zeke moved with effortless precision. He stepped aside, twisted, leaned, advanced. Every single blade missed. It was not frantic dodging. It was measured, controlled motion like someone walking through falling rain without being touched. Edges narrowed his eyes. Even after such a violent exchange, Zeke's breathing remained steady. "What kind of body do you possess?" Edges demanded, frustration mixing with disbelief. "We've been fighting for nearly 2 hours, yet you show no fatigue." Zeke smiled lightly. "I trained my fundamentals seriously," he replied. "Martial arts are important, but without a solid foundation, technique collapses. Structure, endurance, control, those matter just as much." Edges absorbed those words silently.
"You're right."
His aura flared again. "Then I'll refine myself further next time." Without hesitation, he launched another 5-shaded strike. Once more, the storm descended. Once more Zeke broke through it. The hardness of the blade constructs their generation speed, the effective range, the structural stability of each aura leaf. As he dismantled the attack, Zeke evaluated everything calmly. Medium to low maturity. But for Edge's age, extraordinary. Very promising. More than that, Zeke confirmed something he had been quietly considering throughout the battle. The difference between martial arts 1,000 years ago and those of today. In ancient times, the moment of execution was everything. Technique itself embodied the phenomena of the universe. True power merely supported it. It did not define it. But now, modern practitioners materialized true power directly. They reproduced natural phenomena through raw manifestation. Control over that power source had become the essence of martial arts. Zeke felt a flicker of genuine fascination. Even after 1,000 years, something could still surprise him. Edges charged again, unleashing the 5-blade katana without hesitation. Zeke intercepted him mid-strike. Their energies collided violently. From the sidelines, Langus muttered in awe, "Nearly 2 hours, and neither has fallen." Laika watched quietly. "They're not normal fighters. The decisive moment is close." Back in the arena, Edges exhaled heavily, all my movements completely read. Zeke inclined his head slightly. "Yes." There was no mockery in his voice. "I enjoyed this." Edges smiled faintly despite the exhaustion pulling at his limbs. "So did I." Zeke's expression shifted, subtle but decisive. "Out of respect," he said, "I'll show you what I gained from this fight." He raised his hand. A new technique. Edges steadied himself. He already understood. Victory might not be possible. But retreat? Never. Style of the 1,000-bladed katana. Secret technique. Extreme 5-blade. His aura erupted violently, shaking the fractured arena. At the same time, Zeke leapt skyward. Golden energy gathered around his fist, compressing into a dense, radiant sphere. Disruptor Dragon combat technique. Second form. Dozens of compressed energy fists materialized behind him like burning stars. Then they descended. The impact was catastrophic. Shockwaves tore through the arena. Stone shattered. Debris blasted outward in every direction as students scrambled for cover. Raymond raised his shield instantly, bracing himself. That power. It's insane. Sandy clenched her fists, eyes fixed on the explosion. Who won? The barrage swallowed Edges completely. Silence. Smoke rolled across the battlefield as the dust slowly began to settle. Menrich stepped forward, surveying the devastation. This match concludes here. When visibility returned, Edges lay on the broken ground, unable to move. His katana rested several meters away, embedded in cracked stone. He gave a weak, breathless laugh. "So this is your strength." He stared upward at the sky. "My training was not enough." Zeke landed lightly, untouched. Menrich raised his hand. "Victory. East Hall." The arena erupted in stunned murmurs. "He defeated Edges? Who is that East Hall representative? That wasn't human." Langus and Raymond approached Zeke, both wearing satisfied expressions. "As expected," Raymond said. Laika folded her arms. "You destroyed the arena again. You're strange in many ways." Zeke merely shrugged. His focus had already shifted. Laika spoke again, tone sharpening slightly. "Vinil will appear soon, another candidate for head of the household." Zeke observed the other halls thoughtfully. "West Hall has the strongest balance overall," he murmured. "But South Hall, there's someone there who stands out." A faint smile formed on his face. He was curious. Meanwhile, he glanced at the shattered arena. "I may have gone a little too far," he admitted. Langus grinned and pointed. "Watch." To Zeke's surprise, the broken sections of the arena began restoring themselves. Cracks sealed, stone reformed, debris reassembled into its original structure. "What?" Langus explained. "A rare mineral called ethrite is embedded throughout the arena. When true power is channeled into it, it reverts to its original state." Zeke observed the phenomenon carefully. "Another remarkable material of this era. Impressive," he admitted. Before long, the next match began. However, contrary to expectations, the battle between West Hall and South Hall was entirely one-sided. Vanille stood calmly at the center of the arena. Across from him,
The South Hall representative lay unconscious. There had been no drawn-out exchange, no dramatic clash, only overwhelming dominance. Vanille's sand manifested instantly, engulfing his opponent before she could react. The suffocating force crushed her resistance in seconds. The match ended almost as soon as it began. Zeke's teammates stared in stunned silence. Even Zeke's eyes narrowed slightly. Vanille glanced down at the fallen fighter, his expression twisted with extreme hatred and frustration, emotions that did not match the simplicity of his victory. Interesting. Zeke's smile deepened just slightly. The tournament was far from over, and something far more complex was unfolding beneath its surface.